Preface. My Dream of Heaven. Rebecca Ruder Springer was 29 when the American Civil War started in 1861. When the war ended 5 years later, 620,000 soldiers and countless civilians lay dead. It is not surprising, therefore, that the dead and heaven were much considered over the next 40 years in the USA. Spiritual seances were well attended as the bereaved wondered about loved ones lost. Where were they? How were they? Springer was writing when spiritualism was at its peak, with an estimated 8 million followers in the USA and Europe. It was this spiritual climate that created Springer's classic, Intramuros, or, as it is now generally known, My Dream of Heaven, written in 1898. There is not a great deal known about Rebecca Ruder Springer. She was born in 1832 in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the daughter of a Methodist clergyman. She graduated from Wesleyan Female College in 1850, and Methodist Christianity remained her spiritual home. In 1859, she married William Springer, who went on to become a lawyer and a member of the Illinois General Assembly. They had one son, also named William, but Rebecca's health was never good, and described by some as feeble. In 1868, the couple went on a 2-year European tour to improve her health, but it remained poor until her death. Springer did not bestow the status of prophecy on her work, but intended it as a comfort. It was a vision given her during a severe illness in which she was unconscious for some days. She said, "I wrote the book with the hope that it would comfort and uplift those who read it, as its memory will ever do for me. I submit the imperfect sketch of a most perfect vision." Springer wrote several books, but is best remembered for My Dream of Heaven.
Chapter 1. I was many hundred miles away from home and friends, and had been very ill for many weeks. I was entirely among strangers, and my only attendant, though of a kindly disposition, knew nothing whatever of the duties of the sick room. Hence, I had none of the many delicate attentions that keep up an invalid's failing strength. I had taken no nourishment of any kind for nearly 3 weeks. Let me here in the beginning assure you that I do not claim that this strange experience is either a revelation or an inspiration. It came to me during this time of great suffering, and I have always considered it as sent in compensation for this suffering. Be this as it may, it has been a great comfort and help. I was greatly reduced in strength, and consciousness seemed at times to wholly desert me. I had a longing for the presence of my dear ones, for the gentle touch of beloved hands and whispered words of love and courage. But they never came. They could not. Responsible duties that I felt must not be neglected kept these dear ones much of the time in distant places. I lay in a large, comfortable room on the second floor of a house in Kentville. The bed stood in a recess at one end of the room, and from this recess a large stained glass window opened onto a veranda fronting the street. During much of my illness, I lay with my face to this window and my back to the room, and I remember thinking how easy it would be to pass through the window to the veranda if one so desired. When the longing for my loved, distant faces and voices became more than I could bear, I prayed that dear Christ would help me realize his presence, and that since the loved ones of earth could not minister to me, I might feel the influence of the other passed-on dear ones who are ministering spirits. Especially I asked to be sustained should I indeed be called to pass through the dark waters alone. It was no idle prayer, and the response came swiftly, speedily. All anxieties and cares slipped away from me as a worn-out garment, and peace, Christ's peace, enfolded me. I was willing to wait God's time for the coming of those dear to me, and said to myself, if not here, it will be there. There is no fear of disappointment there. In those days of agonized suffering and great peace, I felt that I had truly found, as never before, the refuge of the everlasting arms. They lifted me, they upheld me, they enfolded me, as a tired child upon its mother's bosom. One morning, dark and cold and stormy, after a day and night of intense suffering, I seemed to be standing on the floor by the bed in front of the stained glass window. Someone was standing by me, and when I looked up, I saw it was my husband's favorite brother, Colonel Frank Sprague, who crossed the flood many years ago. "My dear brother Frank," I cried out joyously, "how good of you to come."
It was a great joy to me that I could do so, little sister. Shall we go now?
He drew me toward the window. I turned my head and looked back into the room that somehow I felt I was about to leave forever. It was in its usual good order, a cheery, pretty room. The attendant sat by the stove at the far end of the room reading a newspaper. On the bed lay a white, still form with the shadow of a smile on the poor, worn face. My brother pulled me gently, and I yielded, passing with him through the window, out onto the veranda, and in some unaccountable way, down to the street. There I paused and said, "Frank, I cannot leave Will and our dear boy. They will need me."
Yes, I know. But they will be here. Wouldn't it be better if I brought you back in a while, after they come?
Would you?
Most certainly, if you so desire. You're worn out with the long suffering, and a little rest would give you new strength.
I felt he was right, and we slowly started up the street. He had pulled my hand through his arm and endeavored to interest me as we walked. I stopped and looked wistfully back the way we had come. He was very patient and gentle with me, waiting always until I was ready to proceed again. But at last my hesitation was so great that he said pleasantly,
"You are so weak. I think I had better carry you."
And without waiting for a reply, he stooped and lifted me in his arms as though I had been a little child. And like a child, I yielded, resting my head on his shoulder and laying my arm around his neck. I felt so safe, so content to be in his care. It seemed so sweet, after the long, lonely struggle, just to have someone assume the responsibility of caring so tenderly for me. He walked on with firm, swift steps, and I think I must have slept, for the next I knew, I was sitting in a sheltered nook made by flowering shrubs upon the softest and most beautiful turf of grass, thickly studded with fragrant flowers, many of them flowers I had known and loved on earth. I remember noticing heliotrope, violets, lilies of the valley, and many others totally unfamiliar to me. But instantly I observed how perfect in its way every plant and flower was. For instance, the heliotrope, which with us often runs into long, ragged sprays, grew there on short, smooth stems. Each leaf was perfect and smooth and glossy, instead of being rough and coarse-looking. And the flowers peeped up from the deep grass like velvet, with sweet, happy faces as though inviting the admiration of all. What a scene I looked out upon as I rested on this soft, fragrant cushion, secluded and yet not hidden. Away far beyond the limit of my vision, I just knew stretched this wonderful, perfect grass and flowers, out of which grew equally wonderful trees, whose drooping branches were laden with exquisite blossoms and fruits of many kinds. I found myself thinking of St. John's vision in the Isle of Patmos, and the tree of life that grew in the midst of the garden, bearing 12 manner of fruit, and whose leaves were for the healing of the nations. Beneath the trees, in many happy groups, were little children, laughing and playing and running all around in pure joy, and catching in their tiny hands the bright-winged birds that flitted in and out among them, as though sharing in their sport, as they doubtless were. All through the grounds, older people were walking, sometimes in groups, sometimes by two, sometimes alone, but all with an air of peacefulness and happiness that made itself felt even by me, a stranger. All were in spotless white, though many wore about them or carried in their hands clusters of beautiful flowers. As I looked upon their happy faces and spotless robes, again I thought, these are they who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Look where I would, I saw, half hidden by the trees, elegant and beautiful houses of strangely attractive architecture that I felt must be the homes of the happy inhabitants of this enchanted place. I caught a glimpse of sparkling fountains in many directions, and close by a river with water, clear as crystal. The walks that ran in many directions through the grounds appeared to me to be, and I afterward found were, of pearl, spotless and pure, bordered on either side by narrow streams of water running over stones of gold. The one thought that came to mind as I looked, breathless and speechless, was purity, purity. No shadow of dust, no taint of decay on the fruit or flowers, everything perfect, everything pure. The grass and flowers looked as though fresh washed by summer showers, and not a single blade was any color but the brightest green. The air was soft and balmy, though invigorating, and instead of sunlight there was a golden and rosy glory everywhere, something like the afterglow of a southern sunset in midsummer. As I drew in my breath with a short, quick gasp of delight, I heard my brother, who was standing beside me, say softly,
"Well?"
"Oh, Frank, when such an overpowering sense of God's goodness and my own unworthiness swept over me that I dropped my face into my hands and burst into uncontrollable and very human weeping. Lifting me gently to my feet, Frank said,
"I'm inconsiderate. Come, I want to show you the river."
When we reached the brink of the river, I found the lovely grass ran to the water's edge, and in some places I saw flowers blooming down in the depths among the many-colored pebbles that lined the riverbed. As my brother stepped into the water, he said,
"I want you to see these beautiful stones."
I drew back timidly, saying, "I fear it is cold." And with a reassuring smile, he said,
"Not in the least. Come on in."
"Just as I am?" I said, glancing down at my lovely robe, which, to my great joy, I had found was similar to those of the dwellers in this happy place. With another reassuring smile, he said,
"Just as you are."
Encouraged, I stepped into the gently flowing river, and to my great surprise, found the water, both in density and temperature, almost identical with the air. Deeper and deeper grew the stream as we continued until I felt the soft, sweet ripples playing around my throat. As I stopped, my brother said,
"A little farther still."
"It will go over my head."
"Well, and what then?"
"I cannot breathe under the water. I will suffocate." An amused twinkle came into his eyes, though he said soberly enough,
"We do not do those things here."
I realized the absurdity of my words, and with a happy laugh said, "All right, let's go," and plunged headlong into the bright water, which soon bubbled and rippled several feet above my head. To my surprise and delight, I found I could not only breathe, but laugh and talk, see and hear as naturally under the water as above it. I sat down in the midst of the many-colored pebbles and filled my hands with them as a child would have done. My brother lay down on them as he would have done on the grass and laughed and talked joyously with me. As he rubbed his hands over his face and ran his fingers through his dark hair, he said,
"Do this."
I did as he told me, and the sensation was delightful. I threw back my loose sleeves and rubbed my arms, then my throat, thrust my fingers through my long, loose hair, thinking at the time what a tangle it would be when I left the water. And then the thought came, as we at last arose to return, what are we going to do for towels? For the earth thought still clung to me, and I wondered, too, if the lovely robe was not entirely spoiled. But behold, as we neared the shore, and my head once more emerged from the water, the moment the air struck my face and hair, I realized that I had no need of towel or brush. My flesh, my hair, even my beautiful garments were soft and dry, as before the water touched them. The material out of which my robe was fashioned was unlike anything that I had ever seen. It was soft and light and shone with a faint luster, reminding me more of silk crepe than anything I could recall, only infinitely more beautiful. It fell around me in soft, graceful folds, which the water seemed to have made even more lustrous than before. What marvelous water! What wonderful air! I said to my brother as we again stepped upon the flowery grass, "Are all the rivers like this one?" He replied,
"Not just the same, but similar."
As we walked on a few steps, I turned and looked back at the shining river flowing on tranquilly. "Frank, what has that water done for me?" I said. "I feel as though I could fly." He looked at me with earnest, tender eyes as he answered gently,
"It has washed away the last of the earth life and fitted you for the new life into which you have entered."
It is divine.
Yes, it is divine.
Chapter 2. We walked on for some distance, in silence, my heart wrestling with the thoughts of the new, strange life, my eyes drinking in fresh beauty at every step. The houses, as we approached and passed them, seemed wondrously beautiful to me. They were built of the finest marbles, encircled by broad verandas, the roofs or domes supported by massive or delicate pillars or columns, and winding steps led down to the pearl and golden walks. The style of the architecture was unlike anything I had ever seen, and the flowers and vines that grew luxuriantly everywhere surpassed in beauty even those of my brightest dreams. Happy faces looked out from these columned walls, and happy voices rang upon the clear air from many a celestial home. "Frank, where are we going?"
"Home, little sister."
"Home? We have a home? Is it anything like these? I ask, with a wild desire in my heart to cry out for joy.
Come and see.
He turned into a side path, leading toward an exquisitely beautiful house, whose columns of very light gray marble shone through the green of the overhanging trees with most inviting beauty. Before I could join him, I heard a well-remembered voice saying close behind me, "I just had to be the first to welcome you." And looking around, I saw my old-time friend, Mrs. Wickham. I cried as we met in a warm embrace. "Forgive me, Colonel Sprague," she said, as she gave her hand cordially to my brother. "I shouldn't have intercepted you this way in the first hours, but I heard that she was coming, and I could not wait. Now that I have seen her and heard her dear voice, I will be patient until we have a long, long talk." Frank invited her to come with us, but she declined, saying, "You know, dear little Blossom," the old pet name for me years ago, "we have all eternity before us, but you will bring her to me soon, won't you, Frank?" Then with a warm hand-clasp, she passed swiftly out of my sight.
Her home is not far away. You can see her often. She is a lovely woman. Now come, little sister, I want to welcome you to our home.
Frank took my hand and led me up low steps to a broad veranda with a beautiful inlaid floor of rare and costly marbles, and its massive columns of gray, between which vines covered with rich, glossy leaves of green were intermingled with flowers of exquisite color and delicate perfume hanging in heavy baskets. We paused a moment here, so I might see the charming view presented on every side. "Oh, it is heavenly," I said.
It is heavenly. It could not be otherwise. The entire house, both below and above, is surrounded by these broad verandas. But come inside.
He led me through a doorway between the marble columns into a large reception hall whose inlaid floor, mullioned window, and broad, low stairway at the far end at once held my fancy. Before I could speak, my brother turned to me.
Welcome, 1,000 welcomes, dear sister, to your heavenly home. I built it for you and my brother, and I assure you it has been a labor of love.
Is this your home where I am going to stay with you?
No, it's your home, and I am to stay with you till my brother comes. We will enjoy the present. We will never be far apart again. But come, I'm eager to show you the rest of the house.
He led me through beautiful marble columns to the left that everywhere seemed substituted for doorways to a large, oblong room. I stopped at the threshold in wondering delight. The entire walls and floor of the room were still of that exquisite light gray marble polished to the greatest luster. Over walls and floors were strewn exquisite long-stemmed roses of every variety and color, from the deepest crimson to the most delicate shades of pink and yellow.
Come inside.
I do not want to crush those perfect flowers.
Well then, suppose we gather some of them.
I stooped to take one from the floor close to my feet. Well, and lo! I found it was embedded in the marble. I tried another with the same astonishing result. Then, turning to my brother, I said, "What does it mean? You surely won't tell me that none of these are natural flowers." He nodded his head with a smile and said,
"This room has a history. Come in and sit with me here on this window seat, where you can see the whole room, and let me tell you about it. One day, as I was busily working on the house, a company of young people, boys and girls, came to the door and asked if they might enter. I gladly said yes, and then one of them asked if this house was really for Mr. and Mrs. Sprague. I told them it was indeed. They said they used to know and love you, and that you were their friends and friends of their parents, and that they wanted to do something to help make your house beautiful. I told them indeed they may, and was touched by their request. I asked what they wanted to do, and they asked if they might beautify this room. I said yes, and wondered what they would try to do. Immediately, all the girls, who had immense bunches of roses in their hands, began to throw the flowers over the floor and against the walls. Wherever they struck the walls, they, to even my surprise, remained as if in some way permanently attached. When the roses had all been scattered, the room just looked as it does today. Then the boys each produced a small case of delicate tools, and in a moment, all, boys and girls, were down on the marble floor and busy at work. How they did it, I don't know. It's one of the celestial arts, taught to those of highly artistic tastes. But they embedded each living flower just where and as it had fallen in the marble, and preserved it, as you see before you. They came several times before the work was completed. For the flowers do not wither here nor fade, but are always fresh and perfect. And such a merry, happy company of young people I have never seen before. They laughed and chatted and sang as they worked. I could not help wishing more than once that the friends that they had left mourning for them might look in on this happy group and see how little cause they had for sorrow. At last, when all was complete, they called me to see their work. I was not hesitant with my praises for both the beauty of the work and for their skill in performing it. They said they'd be sure to return when either of you came. They went away together to do something of the kind elsewhere, no doubt.
Happy tears had been dropping on my hands, which were clasped idly in my lap during much of the story. Now I ask half-brokenly, as I was greatly touched, who were these lovely people, Frank? Do you know them?
Of course I know them now. But they were all strangers to me until they came here that first morning, except Lulu Sprague. There were 3 Marys, Mary Green, Mary Bates, Mary Chalmers, and Lulu Sprague and May Camden. These were the girls, each lovely and beautiful. The boys, all manly, fine fellows, were Carol Ashland and Stanley and David Chalmers.
What precious children! How little I thought my love for them in the olden days would ever bring me to this added happiness here. How little we know of the links binding the two worlds.
Yes, that's just it. How little we know. If only we could realize while we're yet mortals that day by day we're building for eternity, how different our lives would be in many ways. Every gentle work, every generous thought, every unselfish deed will become a pillar of eternal beauty in the life to come. We cannot be selfish and unloving in one life and generous and loving in the next. The two lives are too closely blended, one but a continuation of the other. But come now to the library.
We crossed the room that held such tender associations for me and entered the library. Oh, it was glorious. The walls were lined from ceiling to floor with rare and costly books. A large stained glass window opened on the front veranda, and 2 large bow windows, not far apart, were in the back of the room. A semicircular row of shelves supported by very delicate pillars of gray marble about 6 feet high extended some 15 feet into the spacious main room and cut it into 2 sections lengthwise, each with one of the bowed windows in the back, leaving still a large space beyond the dividing line where the 2 sections united again into one. The concave side of the semicircle of shelves was toward the entrance of the room. Close by, not far from the bowed window, stood a beautiful writing desk with everything ready for use. On it was a simply designed golden bowl filled with scarlet carnations, whose spicy odor I had been dimly conscious of for some time.
My brother's desk and his favorite flowers. Here we never forget the taste and preferences of those we love.
All the details of the room unfolded before me gradually as we stood and talked together. My first sensation on entering the room was genuine surprise at the sight of the books, and my first question was, why have we books in heaven?
Why not? What strange ideas mortals have of the pleasures and duties of this blessed life. We seem to think that death of the body means an entire change to the soul. But that's not the case by any means. We bring to this life the same tastes, the same desires, the same knowledge we had before death. If these were not sufficiently pure and good to form a part of this life, then we couldn't enter this life. What would be the use of our often long lives given to the pursuit of certain worthy and legitimate knowledge if at death it counts for nothing, and we begin this life on a wholly different line of thought and study? No, would that everyone could understand, as I have said before, we are building for eternity during our earthly life. The purer the thoughts, the nobler the ambitions, the loftier the aspirations, the higher the rank we take among the hosts of heaven. The more earnestly we follow the studies and duties in our life of probation, the better fitted we shall be to carry them forward, on and on to completion and perfection here.
But the books, who writes them? Are any of them books we knew and loved below?
No doubt many of them. Indeed, all that in any way help to elevate the human mind or immortal soul. Then many of the rarest minds in the earth life, upon entering this higher life, gained such elevated and extended views of the subjects they studied and pursued with such enjoyment on earth, they then write out for the benefit of those less gifted here. The higher, stronger views they acquired on earth serve to make them remain leaders and teachers in this rarer life, as they were in the earth world. Is it to be expected that the great soul who has recently joined our ranks, whose godly life on earth uplifted so many lives, who now with a clear brain and great heart, able to read the mysteries of this higher knowledge, should lay his pen aside? No. When he has well committed his lessons to memory, he will write them out for the benefit of others less gifted, who must follow. Leaders there must always be, in this divine life as in the former life. Leaders and teachers in many varied lines. But all this knowledge will come simply and naturally as they grow into the new life.
Chapter 3. After a short rest in the library among the books, my brother took me through all the remaining rooms of the house, each perfect and beautiful in its own way, and each distinctly and imperishably photographed upon my memory. I will only speak about one other room at this time. As he drew aside the gauzy gray draperies lined with the most delicate shade of amber, which hung before the column doorway of a lovely room on the second floor of the house, he said,
"Your own special place for rest and study."
The entire second story of the house indoors, instead of being finished in gray marble, as was the first floor, was finished with inlaid woods of fine satiny texture and rare polish. And the room we entered was exquisite both in design and finish. It was oblong in shape, with a large bowed window at one end, similar to those in the library, a portion of which was directly beneath this room. On one side of the window stood a writing desk of solid ivory with silver accessories. Opposite was a case of well-filled bookshelves made of the same material. Among the books, I found afterward many of my favorite authors. Rich rugs, silver gray in color, lay scattered over the floor, and all the hangings in the room were of the same delicate hue and texture as those at the entrance. The framework of the furniture was ivory. The upholstering of chairs and ottomans of silver gray cloth with the finish of finest stain, and the pillows and covering of the dainty couch were of the same. A large bowl of wrought silver stood on the table near the front window, filled with pink and yellow roses whose fragrance filled the air. and several graceful vases were also filled with roses. The entire room was beautiful beyond description, but I needed to see it many times before I was fully able to comprehend its perfect completeness. Only one picture hung upon the walls, and that was a life-sized portrait of the Christ, just opposite the couch. It was not an artist's conception of the human Christ, bowed under the weight of sins of the world, nor the thorn-crowned head of the crucified Savior of mankind, but the likeness of the living Master, of Christ the victorious, of Christ the crowned. The wonderful eyes looked directly and tenderly into your own, and the lips seemed to pronounce the benediction of peace. The indescribable beauty of the divine face seemed to light the room with a holy light. And I fell upon my knees and pressed my lips to the sandaled feet, so truthfully portrayed upon the canvas, while my heart cried, Master, beloved Master and Savior. It was long before I could fix my attention on anything else. My whole being was full of adoration and thanksgiving for the great love that had guided me into this haven of rest, this wonderful home of peace and joy. After some time spent in this delightful place, we passed through the open window onto the marble terrace. A stairway of artistically finished marble wound gracefully down from this terrace to the lawn beneath the trees. No pathway of any kind approached at the foot, only the flowery turf. The fruit-laden branches of the trees hung within easy reach from the terrace, and I noticed as I stood there that morning 7 varieties. One kind resembled our Bartlett pear, only much larger and infinitely more delicious to the taste, as I soon found out. Another variety was in clusters, the fruit also pear-shaped, but smaller than the former, and of a consistency and flavor similar to the finest frozen cream. A third, something like a banana in shape, they called breadfruit. It was not unlike our dainty ladyfinger to the taste. It seemed to me at the time, and proved to be so, that in terms of variety and excellence, the most elegant of food was provided without labor or care. My brother gathered some of the different varieties and had me try them. I did so with much excitement. The rich juice from one of the pearl-like fruit ran out over my hands and the front of my dress. "Oh, I have ruined my dress!" I cried. My brother laughed and said,
"Show me the stains. Look at your hands."
To my amazement, I could not find a spot. I found everything clean and fresh as though just from the bath. What does this mean? My hands had been covered with the thick juice of the fruit. He answered that no impurity can remain for one instant in this air. Nothing decays, nothing tarnishes, or in any way disfigures or mars the universal purity and beauty of this place. As fast as the fruit ripens and falls, all that is not immediately gathered at once evaporates. Not even the seed remains. I had noticed that no fruit lay beneath the trees, so this was the reason for it. I quoted thoughtfully, "And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth." We descended the steps and again entered the flower room. As I stood once more admiring the inlaid roses, my brother asked,
"Whom of all the friends you have in heaven do you most wish to see?"
"My father and mother," I answered quickly. Frank smiled so significantly that I hastily turned, and there, advancing up the long room to meet me, I saw my dear father and mother, and with them my youngest sister. Ah, with a cry of joy, I flew into my father's outstretched arms and heard with a thrill of joy his dear, familiar, "My precious little daughter." At last, I cried, clinging to him. "At last I have you again." "At last," he echoed, with a deep, drawn breath of joy. Then he looked at my dear mother, and we were soon clasped in each other's arms, as my sister enfolded us both in her arms. Disengaging one arm, I threw it around her and drew her into the happy circle of our united love. Oh, what an hour that was! I did not dream that heaven could hold such joy. After a time, my brother, who had shared our joy, said, "Now I must leave you for a few hours, as I have work to do. So for a while, goodbye. And do not forget that rest, especially as you have just recently entered the new life. Rest is not only one of the pleasures, but one of the duties of heaven." "Yes, we will make sure she does not forget that," said my father with a kindly smile. Chapter 4. Soon after my brother's departure, my mother said, "Come, I am anxious to have you visit our home." We all passed from the rear entrance and walked a few hundred yards across the soft grass and entered a lovely home, somewhat similar to our own, yet still unlike it in many details. It also was built of marble, but darker than that of our home. Every room was modestly furnished, and the air about it was at once felt delightful. My father's study was on the second floor, and the first thing I noticed on entering was the luxuriant branches and flowers of an old-fashioned rose tree that covered the window by his desk. Oh, I can almost imagine myself in your old study at home when I look at that window. Isn't it a reminder? I almost think it is the same dear old bush transplanted here," he said happily. "And is it still your favorite flower?" I asked. He nodded his head and said, "I see you remember your childhood days." And he patted my cheek as I gathered a rose and fastened it upon his shirt. "Seems to me that this ought to be your home, but it is our father's home," said my sister wistfully. "No," my father replied quickly. "Colonel Sprague is her legitimate guardian and instructor. It is wise and admirable arrangement. He is in every way the most suitable instructor she could possibly have. Our father never errs." "Doesn't Frank have a lovely character?" I asked. "Lovely indeed, and he stands very near to the Master. Few have a clearer knowledge of the divine will, so few are better fitted for instructors. But I also have duties that call me away from time to time. How blessed we are to know that there can never again be long separations. You will have two homes now, dear child, your own and ours." "Yes, I suspect I shall be here almost as much as there." At this moment, a swift messenger approached my father and spoke a few low words. "Yes, I shall go at once," he replied, and waving goodbye, he departed with the angelic guide. "What are my father's duties?" I asked my mother. "He is called usually to those who enter life with little preparation, that which on earth we call deathbed repentance. You know what wonderful success he always had in winning souls to Christ. And these poor spirits need to be taught from the very beginning. They enter the spirit life in its lowest phase, and it is your Father's pleasant duty to lead them upward, step by step. He is devoted to his work and greatly beloved by those he thus helps. He allows me to often accompany him and labor with him, and that is such a pleasure to me. And do you know, she said with an indescribable look of happiness, I forget nothing now. It had been her great burden for some years before her death that memory failed her sadly, and I could understand and sympathize with her present delight. Mom, I cried as I folded her in my arms, then it is like the early years of your married life again. Precisely, she said joyously. A little later, my sister drew me aside and whispered, Tell me of my boy, my precious son. I often see him, but we are not permitted to know as much of the earthly life as we once believed we should. The Father's tender wisdom gives us knowledge as he sees us best, and we must be content to wait on his time for more. All you can tell me would not be denied. Is he surely coming to me sometime? Can I hold him again in my arms? I told her I was sure she would see him again, and that her memory was very precious to him. Then I told her all I could recall of the son with whom she had parted while he was but a child, now grown to an honored and loved adult, with a home, wife and son of his own to comfort and bless him. Then I can wait, she said. If he is surely to come to me at last when his earthly work is done bringing his wife and son, I'm sure I will love them too. At this moment, I felt myself encircled by tender arms, and a hand was laid gently on my eyes. Guess who? Someone whispered softly. I know the voice, the touch. Dearest, dearest Nell, I cried, and turning quickly threw my arms around the neck of my only brother. He gathered me warmly to his heart, then in his old-time playful way lifted me off my feet in his strong arms, saying, She has not grown an inch and is not, I believe, a day older than when we last parted, is she, Joe? Turning to our sister, But I thought she would never come. Come now, they have had you long enough for the first visit. The rest of us want you for a while. Will you come too, Mother? I cannot, dear boy. I must be here when your father returns. Take your sisters. It is such a blessed sight to see you all together again. Come then, he said, and each taking one of his hands, we went off and out together. After a short walk, he suddenly called, Halt! In his old-time military fashion. We stopped suddenly in front of a dainty house built of the finest polished woods. It was beautiful, both in architecture and finish. How lovely! I cried. With a bow of charming humility, he said, The home of your humble servant. Enter. I paused a moment on the wide veranda to examine a vine, wound around the graceful columns of highly polished wood, and my brother laughingly said to my sister, She is the same old sis. We will not get much good out of her until she has learned the name of every flower, vine, and plant in heaven. Yes, you will, I said, shaking my head at his happy face, but I mean to utilize you whenever I can. I have so much to learn. And so you shall, dear, he gently answered. But come in. Stepping inside a lively vestibule, out of which opened spacious rooms on every side, he called softly, Alma. At once, from one of the rooms, a fair woman approached us. "My dear child," I said, "it does not seem possible. You were but a child when I saw you last." "She is still her father's girl," said my brother with a fond look. "She and Carrie, whom you have never seen, make a blessed home for me. Where is your sister, Alma?" "She is at the great music hall. She has a lovely voice she is cultivating," said Alma, turning to me. "We were going to come and find you when she returned," she added. And then they showed me the lovely home, perfect and charming in every detail. When we came out upon a side veranda, I saw we were so near an adjoining house that we could easily step from one veranda to the other. "There," said my brother, lightly lifting me over the intervening space, "there is someone here you will want to see." Before I could question him, he led me through the columned doorway, saying, "People in heaven are always at home to their friends." The house we entered was almost identical in construction and finish with that of my brother Nell, and as we entered, 3 people came eagerly forward to greet me. "Dear Aunt Gray," I cried, "and Mary, and my dear Martin, what a joy to meet you again." "And here," said my aunt reverently. "Yes, here," I answered in like tone. It was my father's sister, always a favorite aunt, with her son and his wife. How we did talk and cling to one another and ask and answer questions. "Pallas is also here, and Will, but they have gone with Carrie to the music hall," said Martin. "Martin, can you sing here?" I asked. He always was trying to sing on earth, but could not master a tune. A little," he answered with his old genial laugh and shrug. "We can do almost anything here that we really try to do." "You should hear him now, cousin, when he tries to sing," said his wife with a little touch of pride in her voice. "You would not know it was Martin. But isn't it nice to have Dr. Nell so near us? We are almost one household. You see, we all felt that we must be together." "It is indeed nice that you are so close, although you no longer need him in his professional capacity." "No, thanks to the Father, but we need him quite as much in many other ways. I rather think I am the one to be grateful," said my brother. "But, sister, I promised Frank that you should go to your room a while. He thought it wise that you should be alone for a time. Shall we go now?" "I am ready," I answered, "though these delightful reunions don't leave me wanting to rest." "How blessed we are," said my aunt, "that there is no limit here to our mutual enjoyment. We have nothing to dread, nothing to fear. We know at parting that we shall meet again. We shall see each other often, my child." Then my brother went with me to my own home, and with a loving embrace, left me at the door of my room. Once inside, I lay down on my couch to think over the events of this wonderful day. But looking upward at the divine face above me, I forgot all else, and Christ's peace enfolded me like a mantle. I became as one whom his mother comforteth. While I lay in this blissful rest, my brother Frank returned, and without arousing me, carried me in his strong arms again to earth. I did not know when he left me in our home what mission he was on, though my father knew it was to return to my dear husband and accompany him on his sad journey to his dead wife, to comfort and sustain and strengthen him in those first lonely hours of sorrow. They deemed it best, wisely, that I should wait a while before returning and taste the blessedness of this new life, therefore gaining strength for the trial before me of seeing by loved ones saddened by my passing. Chapter 5. In the company of my brother Frank, we saw a tall young man standing close by the open gate, looking wistfully the way we came. A closer scrutiny revealed his identity. He was my nephew, and one of the boys that had helped decorate the room in my house so beautifully with long-stemmed roses. I joyfully extended both hands to him. "My dear Carol." He smiled a bright welcome as he held out his hands and said lovingly, "I hope my mother joins us soon." "She will come to you before long, and you know that then you will be together forever." "Yes, I know," he answered brightly. "I will be patient, but I am so anxious for her to see the lovely home I'm building for her myself. Will you come and see it now?" "Of course, I will gladly," I replied, looking at my brother for his sanction. He nodded his head and said, "This is good, Carol. Have her help you in every way you can. I will leave you two together, and you can bring her to me later." "I will indeed," said my nephew, and we went happily away together. "Where is this wonderful house, Carol?" "Not very far beyond Mrs. Wickham's," he answered. We soon reached it, and I was truly charmed with it in every way. It was fashioned much like my brother Nell's home, and was, like it, built of polished woods. It was only partly finished, and was most artfully done. Although uncompleted, I was struck with the fact that everything finished so far was done so perfectly. There was no debris anywhere, no chips, no shavings, no dust. The wood seemed to have been perfectly prepared elsewhere, where I have no idea. The pieces were made to fit accurately, like the parts of a great puzzle. It required much skill and artistic taste to properly adjust each in its place. This, my nephew, who even in the earthly life was quite a mechanical genius, seemed to have no difficulty in doing, and the house was slowly growing into beauty and symmetry. After showing me all over the house, he at last drew aside the hangings before an entrance. Beyond were 2 rooms, not only entirely finished, but beautifully furnished as well. I finished and furnished these rooms complete, so that if my mother came before the house was ready, she could occupy them at once. You know there is no noise from workmen here, no hammering, no unwelcome sounds. I thought at once of the Temple of Jerusalem, where, during its erection, there was neither hammer, nor axe, nor any tool of iron heard in the house. "It is beautiful, my dear boy," I said enthusiastically. "It will give her great joy to know you did it for her." "But what is this? A fireplace?" I said, pausing before a lovely open chimney where wood was piled ready to be lighted. "Is it ever cold enough here for fires?" "It is never cold," he answered, "but the fire here never sends out unneeded warmth. We have its cheer and beauty and glow without any of its discomforts. You remember my mother loves to sit by an open fire, so I have arranged this for her." "Oh, it is charming. But did you not make the stained glass windows also?" No, I have a friend who has been taught that art, and we exchange work. He helps me with the windows, and I in turn help him with his fine woodwork and inlaying. I'm going to make it a flower room for my mother, similar to yours, only of lilies and violets, which will retain their perfume always. How lovely! I want to thank you, dear Carol, for your sharing in our flower room. It is the most exquisite work I have ever seen, and it is doubly so when I remember whose hands fashioned it. It was a labor of love with all of us, he said simply. That is what enhances its beauty for me, I said. But sit here by me now and tell me about yourself. Do you spend all of your time at this delightful work? Oh, no, indeed. Perhaps what we used to call 2 or 3 hours daily. Much of my time is still spent with my grandfather. I do not know what I should have done when I first came here, but for him I was so ignorant about this life, and came so suddenly. Yes, dear boy, I know, I said sympathetically. Grandfather met me at the very entrance and took me at once home, where he and Grandma did everything possible to instruct and help me. But I was, well, I still am, far below what I ought to be. I would go back to the old life for an entire year, if only I could go to my old friends, or better, into every Sunday school in the world, and beg the boys and girls to try to understand and profit by the instruction they receive. Why, I used to go to Sunday school, Sunday after Sunday, help sing the hymns and read the lesson and listen to all that was said, and I really enjoyed every moment of the time. Sometimes I would feel a great longing after a better life, but there seemed to be no one to especially guide or help me. The greater part of the time, what I heard one Sunday was never once spoken or even thought of until another Sunday came. The impression made was very transient. Why don't boys and girls talk more together about what they hear at Sunday school? We were all ready enough to talk about a show of any kind after it was over, but seldom of the Sunday school when together socially. Why don't teachers take more interest in the daily lives of their scholars? Why is there so little really helpful talk in ordinary home life? Ah, wish I could go back and tell them this. His face beamed with enthusiasm as he talked, and I, too, wished it might be possible for him to do as he desired. But alas, they will not be persuaded even if one arises from the dead, I thought. It is time for me to go with my grandfather, he said, rising. But we can walk together as far as your home, and you will let me see you often, right? Gladly, I answered, as we set out. We still talked of many things as we walked. When we parted at the door, I said, I am soon to learn how to weave lovely draperies. Then I can help you when you're ready for them. That will make my work still more delightful, was his reply, as he hastened on in the direction of my father's home. Chapter 6. As time passed, and I grew more accustomed to the heavenly life around me, I found its loveliness unfold to me like the slow opening of a rare flower. Delightful surprises met me at every turn. A dear friend, with whom I had parted ways years ago in the earth life, would come unexpectedly to me with cordial greetings. Someone on earth greatly admired, but that I had held somewhat aloof from fear of unwelcome intrusion, would approach me showing a lovely soul so full of kindness and congenial thoughts that I would feel a pang of regret for what I had lost. Then the clear revelation of some truth, only partly understood in life, though eagerly sought after, would stand out strong before me, overwhelming me with its brightness and perhaps showing the close tie linking the earth life with the divine. But the most wonderful to me was the occasional meeting with someone whom I had never hoped to meet over there, who, with eager handshake and tearful eyes, would pour out his earnest thanks for some helpful word, some solemn warning, or even some stern rebuke that had turned him, all unknown to myself, from the paths of sin into the life everlasting. Oh, the joy to me of such a revelation! Oh, the regret that my earth life had not been more full of such work for eternity. Daily my first impulse on awaking from happy, blissful rest was to walk to the river of life and plunge into its wonderful waters, so refreshing, so invigorating, so inspiring. With a heart full of thanksgiving and lips full of praise, morning after morning, sometimes in the company of my brother, sometimes alone, I returned always full of new life and hope and purpose to our home. Each day I listened to the entrancing revelations and instruction of my brother. One morning, soon after my return from a first visit to earth, as I was on the way to the river, my voice joined in to a wonderful anthem of praise sounding everywhere. I saw a lovely young girl approaching me quickly with outstretched arms. "Dear Aunt Bertha, do you know me?" "My little May," I cried, gathering this dainty creature into my arms. "Where did you come from so suddenly? Let me look at you again." Holding her a moment at arm's length, only to hug her again tenderly. "You have grown up so very beautiful. I'm sure I can say this to you freely. You were always lovely. You are simply radiant now. Is it this divine life?" "Yes," she said sweetly, "but most of all the being near the Savior so much." "Ah, yes, that is it. Being near him. That will make any being radiant and beautiful," I said. "He is so good to me, so generous, so tender, and he seems to forget how little I have done to deserve his care." "I'm sure he knows you love him, dear heart. That means everything to him." "Love him? Oh, if loving him deserves reward, I am sure I ought to have every wish of my heart, for I love him 1,000-fold better than anything in earth or heaven. I would die for him." Her sweet face grew surpassingly radiant and beautiful as she talked, and I began to dimly understand the wonderful power of Christ among the redeemed in heaven. This dear child, so lovely in all mortal graces, so full of earth's enjoyments during her brief life, pure and good as we count goodness below, yet seemingly too absorbed in life's gaieties to think deeply of the things she should revere and honor in her heart. Now, in this blessed life, she counted the privilege of loving Christ, of being near him, beyond every other joy. How that love refined and beautified the giver. As a great earthly love always shines through the face and elevates the entire character of the one who loves, so this divine love uplifts and glorifies the giver until not only the face, but the entire person radiates the glory that fills the heart. "Come with me to the river, May," I said. After we had talked for some time, "come with me for a delightful plunge." "Gladly," she said. "But have you ever been to the lake or the sea?" "The lake or sea?" I echoed. "No, indeed. Is there a lake and a sea here?" "Certainly there are," said May, with a little pride that she should know more of the heavenly surroundings than I. "Shall we go to the lake today and leave the sea for another day? Which will it be?" "Let it be the lake today," I said. So, turning in an entirely different direction from the path that led to the river, we walked joyously on, still talking as we went. So much to recall, so much to look forward to with joy. Once she turned to me and asked quickly, "When is my Uncle Will coming?" My hand closed tightly over hers, and a sob rose in my throat, though I answered calmly, "That is in God's hands alone. We may not question." "Yes, I know. His will is always right, but I long to see my Uncle Will again, and to long is not to complain." She had grown so womanly, so wise, this child of tender years, since we parted, that it was a joy to talk with her. I told her of my sad errand to earth, and the sorrow of the dear ones I had left. Yes, I know it all," she whispered, "but it will not be long to wait. They will come soon. It never seems long to wait for anything here. There's always so much to keep one busy, so many pleasant duties, so many joys. Oh, it will not be long." So she cheered and comforted me as we walked through the ever-changing and always perfect landscape. At times she lifted her arm and, pointing with her rosy fingers, said, "Behold, is this not divinely beautiful?" I caught my breath and stopped abruptly, covering my face with my hands to shield my eyes from the glorified scene. Oh, no wonder Frank hadn't brought me to this place sooner. I was not yet spiritually strong enough to look upon it. When I again slowly lifted my head, May was standing like someone entranced. The golden morning light rested on her face and mingled with the radiance that had given birth within. It almost transfigured her. Even May, who had so long lived here, had not yet grown accustomed to seeing its glory. "Look, Auntie, it is God's will that you should see," she whispered softly, not once turning her eyes away from the scene before her. "He let me be the one to show you the glory of this place." The lake spread before us, as smooth as glass, but flooded with a golden glory caught from the heavens that made it like a sea of molten gold. The blossom and fruit-bearing trees grew down to its very border in many places, and far, far away across its shining waters arose the domes and spires of what seemed to be a mighty city. Many people were resting on its flowery banks, and on the surface of the water were boats of wonderful structure, filled with happy souls, and propelled by unseen power. Little children, as well as grown-ups, were floating or swimming in the water. As we looked on, a band of singing cherubs, floating high above, drifted across the lake. Their baby voices could be heard in notes of joyful praise. "Come, let's join them, glory and honor," sang the child's voices. "Dominion and power," sang the voices of the vast multitude below, together. I found that May and I were joining in. The cherub band floated on and away, but in the distance we caught the faint melody of their sweet voices and the stronger cadence of the response from those below. We stood at the edge of the lake. Tears ran down my cheeks as my eyes dimmed with emotion. I felt as weak as a little child. But what rapture and unspeakable joy filled me. Was I dreaming, or was this indeed another phase of the immortal life? May slipped her arm around my neck and whispered, "Come, Auntie, rest." I yielded to her as I could not do otherwise. She led me into the water, down down into its crystal depths, when it seemed to me we must be hundreds of feet beneath the surface, she laid down and asked me to do the same. I did, and immediately we began to slowly rise. Soon I found that we no longer rose, but we were slowly floating in mid-current, many feet beneath the surface. Then I saw what seemed to be a marvel. Perfect prismatic rays surrounded me. I seemed to be resting in the heart of a prism. There was such vivid yet delicate coloring, the likes of which I had never seen. Instead of the 7 colors as we see them on Earth, the colors blended in such rare gradation of shades as if to make the rays seem almost infinite. Or they really were infinite. I couldn't decide which. As I lay watching this marvelous panorama, the colors deepened and faded like the lights of the aurora borealis, and I heard the distant sound of music. Although May and I were not touching one another, we didn't drift apart as one would suppose we might. We lay within easy speaking distance of each other, though few words were spoken between us. The silence seemed too sacred to be broken. We lay within the water as if on the softest couch. It required no effort whatsoever to keep ourselves afloat. The gentle undulation of the waves soothed and rested us. And when the distant music caught my attention again, I turned and looked at May. She smiled back at me, but did not speak. Soon I caught the words, "Glory and honor, dominion and power." And I knew it was still the cherub choir, although they must be miles away now. Then the soft tones of a bell, a silver bell with a silver tongue, sounded, and as the last notes died away, I whispered, "Tell me about all this, May." She explained. The waters of this lake catch the light in a most incredible manner, as you have seen. A wiser head than mine must tell you why. The water also transmits musical sounds, only musical sounds, for a great distance. The song was evidently from a distant shore of the lake. And the bell? That is the bell in the city across the lake that calls people to certain duties at this hour. Well, there was never a sweeter call to duty, I said. Yes, its notes are beautiful. Listen now, there is a chime ringing. We laid and listened, and as we listened, a sweet spell wrapped itself around me, and I slept as peacefully as a child on its mother's bosom. I awoke with a strange sense of invigoration and strength. It was a feeling quite different from the feeling I experienced during a bath in the river, yet I could not explain how it was different. May said, "One takes away the last of the earth life and prepares us for the life here in heaven. The other fills us to overflowing from the celestial life itself." And I think the child was right. When we emerged from the water, we found the banks of the lake almost deserted, everyone having gone at the call of the bell to the happy duties of the hour. Groups of children still played around in joyous freedom. Some climbed the trees that overhung the water with the agility of squirrels and dropped with happy shouts of laughter into the lake. Some floated around on the surface like large, beautiful water lilies or lotus flowers. As we stood watching, I said, "No fear of harm or danger, no dread of ill, or anxiety of an accident occurring. Security. Yes, security and joy and peace." "This is indeed the blessed life," I said as we stood watching the sports of the happy children. I often think how we were taught to believe that heaven was where we would wear crowns of gold and stand always with harps in our hands. But our crowns of gold are the halos his blessed presence casts around us, and we do not need harps to accentuate our songs of praise. We do see the crowns, and we do hear the angelic harps, when and as God will it. But our best worship is to do his will. May said this as we turned to go. "You are wise in the ways of heaven, my child," I answered. "How happy I am to learn from one so dear. Tell me about your life here." So we talked and walked, and she told me the history of her years in heaven, her duties, her joys, her friends, her home, with all the old-time freedom I remembered. I found her home was quite away from our own, far beyond the spires of the great city across the lake. But she added, "What is distance in heaven? We come and go at will. We feel no fatigue, no haste, experience no delays. It's wonderful." Not far from our home, we saw a group of children playing on the grass, and in their midst was a beautiful great dog, which they were rolling over and tumbling with in great freedom. As we approached, the dog broke away from them and came bounding to meet us. He crouched at our feet with a gesture of glad welcome. "Don't you know him, Auntie?" May asked brightly. "It is dear old Sport," I cried, stooping and hugging him around his neck and resting my head on his silken hair. "Dear Sport, how happy I am to have you here." He responded to my petting with every expression of delight, and May laughed aloud at our mutual joy. I have often wondered if I should not someday find him here. He surely deserves a happy life for his faithfulness and devotion in the other life. His intelligence and his fidelity were far above those of many human beings that we count immortal. Did he sacrifice his life for little Will? Yes. He attempted to cross the track in front of an approaching train because he saw it would pass between him and his little master, and feared he was in danger. It cost him his life. He always seemed to place himself between anyone that threatened danger to Will. He was a gallant fellow and deserves immortality. "Dear Sport, you will never leave me again," I said, petting him fondly. At this he sprang to his feet, barking joyously, and jumped around in front of us the rest of the way home. And then he lay down on the doorstep with an upward glance and a wag of his bushy tail as though to say, "See how I take you at your word?" "He understands every word we say," said May. "Of course he does. He only lacks speech to make him perfect. I somehow hoped he might find it here." "Oh, he would not be half so interesting if he could talk," said May. Possibly not. How silken and beautiful his long hair is. He has his bath in the river every day, and it leaves its mark on him also. Do you know, I think one of the sweetest proofs we have of the Father's loving care for us is that we so often find in this life the things which gave us great happiness below. The more unexpected this is, the greater joy it brings. I remember once seeing a beautiful little girl enter heaven, the very first to come from a large and affectionate family. I afterward learned that the sorrowful cry of her mother was, "Oh, if we only had someone there to meet her and care for her." She came lovingly nestled in the Master's own arms. A little later, as he sat caressing and talking to her, a remarkably fine Angora kitten, which the child had loved and had sickened and died some week before, to her great sorrow, came running across the grass and jumped directly into her arms. It lay contentedly in her lap. Such a glad cry as she recognized her little kitten, such hugging and kissing that kitten received. It made joy even in heaven. Who but our loving Father would have thought of such comfort for a little child? She had evidently been a timid child, but now as the children gathered around her in their delightful freedom they always showed in the presence of the beloved Master, she, looking up confidently into the tender eyes above her, began to shyly tell of the marvelous intelligence of her pet, until at last Jesus left her contentedly playing among the flowers with the little companions who had gathered around her. Our Father never forgets us, but provides pleasures and comforts for all of us according to our individual needs. I wondered to myself, when can I see the Savior? When will I get to meet him face to face? May, as though understanding my thoughts, put her arms around my neck and whispered, "You, too, will see him soon. He never delays when the time is ripe for his coming to you. It will not be long." So we parted, each to our separate duties of the hour. Chapter 7. The following morning, after an interesting hour of instruction, my brother said to me,
"Shall we go for the promised visit to Mrs. Wickham now?"
"Indeed, yes," I answered eagerly, so we at once started out. We soon reached her lovely home and found her waiting at the entrance as though expecting us. After a cordial greeting to our friend, my brother said,
"I will leave you together for that long talk which I know you're both looking forward to, and go attend to my other duties. I will see you at home later."
"All right," I answered. "I'm familiar with the way home now." After he had gone, my friend took me all over her home, showing me with great pleasure the rooms prepared for each beloved member of her earthly household still to come. One very large room had open windows at each end. Through the windows, blossom and fruit-laden trees looked invitingly. It was evidently the room she took special care, as she whispered to me, "Douglas always did like a large room. I am sure he will like this one." And I was also sure. Returning down the broad stairway, we found it entered into a very large music room with broad raised stages supported by marble columns running across 3 sides of it and level with the second floor. On the stages were a number of musical instruments, harps, violins, and some instruments I'd never seen before. The room was filled with easy chairs, couches, and window seats, where listeners could rest and hear the sweet harmonies played. "My daughter," my friend explained, "who left us in early childhood, has received a fine musical training here, and with a gathering of her friends, likes to give us a musical treat quite often. You know, our old home of Springfield had furnished some rare voices for the heavenly choirs. Mary Alice, Will Griggs, and many others you will often hear in this room, I trust." We re-entered from this room the dainty reception hall opening on the front veranda and outer steps. Here Mrs. Wickham asked me to take a seat beside her and said, "Now, tell me everything of the Earth home and those still there." Holding each other's hands, we talked, she questioning and I answering for quite some time. At last she said, rising hastily, "There's much yet I'd like to hear. Wait a moment, and I will return." I had already learned not to question the judgment of these wiser friends, and waited. As she passed through the doorway inside, I saw a stranger approaching and stood to meet him. He was tall and impressive in form, with a face of sweetness and beauty. Where had I seen him before? Surely I had met him since I came. Ah, now I know, I thought. It is St. John, the beloved disciple. He had been pointed out to me one morning by the riverside.
"Peace be unto this house,"
was his salutation as he walked up the steps. But the way his voice stirred and thrilled me, I thought, could this be the master? "Shall I call the mistress?" I asked.
"No, don't call her. She knows I am here. Come, sit down beside me,"
he said, noting that I was still standing after he had taken a seat. I did as I was asked, all the while watching the wonderful face before me.
"You have just come lately,"
he said. "Yes, I've only been here a short time," I answered.
That matters little,"
he said with a gentle smile.
"Many cling to the old thinking and the earth language. It is a link between the two lives. We would not have it otherwise. How does the change impress you? How do you find life here?"
Oh, if those on earth could only know. I never fully understood till now the meaning of that sublime passage, "Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him." It is indeed past human conception. I spoke with deep feeling.
"For them that love him? Do you believe that all Christians truly love him? Do you think they love the Father's love and mercy? Or is their worship ofttimes that of duty rather than love?"
He spoke reflectively and gently. "Oh," I said, "there is no doubt about the love you inspire in all hearts who seek to know you." A radiant glow spread over this wonderful face, and he turned and looked me directly in the eye. The mist rolled away from my eyes, and I knew him. With a low cry of joy and adoration, I threw myself at his feet, bathing them with happy tears. He gently stroked my bowed head for a moment. Then rising, he lifted me to his side. "My Savior, my King," I whispered, clinging closely to him.
"Yes, and elder brother and friend,"
he said, wiping away the tears that were stealing from beneath my closed eyelids. "The highest among 10,000, and the one altogether lovely." Again, I whispered.
"Now you begin to meet the conditions of this new life. Like many, the changing of faith to actual sight may bring a little fear. That is all wrong. Have you forgotten the promise? I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there ye may be also. If you loved me when you could not see me, except by faith, love me more now that we are really co-heirs of the Father. Come to me with all that perplexes or gladdens you. Come to the elder brother, always waiting with joy to see you."
Then we sat and talked long and earnestly as he unfolded many of the mysteries of the divine life. I hung on his every word. I drank in every tone of his voice. I watched eagerly every line of his beloved face, and I was exalted, uplifted beyond the power to express in words. Then, with a divine smile, he stood.
"We will meet often,"
he said. Then I bent over and pressed my lips reverently to the hands still clasping my own. Then laying his hands for a moment in blessing on my bowed head, he left silently and swiftly from the house. As I stood watching the Savior's fast receding figure passing beneath the flower-laden trees, I saw two beautiful young girls coming the way he went. It was Mary Bates and May Camden, walking with arms entwined. When they saw the Master, they flew to meet him, and he cheerfully extended a hand to each. They turned, and each clinging to his hand, one on each side, they joined him on his way. They looked up trustingly into his face as he talked with them. I saw his face from time to time in profile as he turned and looked down lovingly, first at one, then the other, and I thought, that is the way he would have us to be with him, really as children with a beloved elder brother. I watched them until the trees hid them from sight. I longed to have time with the dear girls, but knew his presence was to them more than all else. I turned to go through the beautiful entrance of the house, but before I reached the door I was met by Mrs. Wickham. Before I could speak, she said, "Shh, I know all about it. Do not try to speak. I know your heart is full. I will see you again very soon. So go." And she gently pushed me on my way. How my heart blessed her, for it seemed sacrilege to try and talk on ordinary topics after this blessed experience. I did not follow the pathway, but walked across the flowery turf beneath the trees until I reached home. I found my brother sitting on the veranda, and as I walked up the steps, he rose to meet me. When he looked in my face, he took both hands into his for an instant and simply said gently,
"I see you've been with the Master."
And he stepped aside for me to enter the house. I went quickly to my room, dropped the draperies behind me at the door, threw myself down on the couch, and with closed eyes lived over every instant I had spent in that hallowed presence. I recalled every word and tone of the Savior's voice and fastened the instructions he had given me indelibly on my memory. I seemed to have been lifted to a higher plane of existence. I seemed to have taken a deeper drink from the fountain of all good since I met him whom my soul loved. It was a long, blessed communion that I held with my own soul on that hallowed day. When I looked at the pictured face above me, I wondered that I had not at once recognized Christ. The likeness was so perfect. When at last I arose, the soft golden twilight was around me, and I knelt by my couch to offer my first prayer in heaven. Up to this time in my life, there had been a constant thanksgiving. There had seemed no room for prayer. Now as I knelt, all I could say over and over was, "I thank thee, blessed Father, I thank thee, I thank thee." When I at last descended the stairs, I found my brother standing in the great flower room, and going to him I said softly, "Frank, what do you do in heaven when you want to pray?"
"We praise,"
he answered. "Then let us praise now," I said. And standing there with clasped hands, we lifted up our hearts and voices in a hymn of praise to God. My brother sang with his clear, strong, leading voice, I following. As the first notes sounded, I thought the roof echoed, but I soon found that other voices blended with ours until the entire house seemed filled with unseen singers. Such a grand hymn of praise earth never heard, and as the hymn went on, I recognized many dear voices from the past. Will Grigg's pathetic tenor, Mary Alice's exquisite soprano, and many other voices that awakened memories of long ago. Then, as I heard sweet child voices and looked up, I saw above us a cloud of radiant baby faces which flooded my heart with joy. The room seemed filled with them. "What a life! What a divine life!" I whispered. We stood until the last lingering notes had died away. Then my brother and I returned to the veranda and sat in the golden twilight.
You are only in the first pages of its record. Heaven's blessedness must be gradually unfolded to us, or we could not even hear bear its dazzling glory.
Then followed an hour of talk where Frank led my soul still deeper into the mysteries of the glorious life I had now entered. He taught me, I listened. Sometimes I questioned, but rarely. I was content to take of the heavenly manna as it was given me, with a heart full of gratitude and love. Chapter 8. The next day, my brother was away on an important mission, and I started out alone to see if I could find the dear young friends that I had seen the day before. I knew that all things were in order in that happy world, and that sooner or later I would find them again. I couldn't help but hope it would be soon. I recalled the happy light on their fresh young faces as they had met the beloved master, and I hoped to talk with them of their life from day to day. I began again to think of my interview with him, and became so absorbed in these thoughts that I was oblivious to the beautiful world around me. Suddenly I heard someone say, "Surely that is Mrs. Sprague." Looking up, I saw sweet Mary Bates a few steps away, looking at me intently. I cried joyfully, "Oh, my precious Mamie!" She ran to me and folded me in her arms, drawing my head to her shoulder in the old caressing way, almost sobbing in her joy. "Dear little Muzzer," a pet name often used by her in the past, "how glad I am to have you here. I could hardly wait to find you." "How did you know I was here, Mamie?" "The master told me," she said softly. "May had already told me, and we were on the way to find you when we met him yesterday, and he told us he had just left you. Then we knew we must wait a little," she said reverently. How my heart thrilled. He had spoken of me after we parted. I longed to ask her what he had said, but dared not. Seeming to divine my thoughts, she continued, "He spoke so tenderly about you and said we must be with you often. May had work to do today, and as she had already seen you once, I came alone. She may be here later. May I stay a long time with you? There's so much to tell you, so much to ask about." "Indeed, you may. I had started out to find you when we met. Come, let's return to my home at once." So clinging to each other, we set out toward my home. "What shall I tell you first?" I asked. "Everything about the dear ones, every individual member of our beloved household. Begin with my precious, heartbroken mother." Her voice broke a little, but she continued, "I am with her often, but her great, and I fear unreconciled sorrow keeps me from being the comfort to her I want to be. If only she could spend 1 hour with me here, could know God's wisdom and love as we know it, how the cloud would lift from her life, and she would see that the 2 lives, after all, are but one." Yes, I answered. I urged her to think of it in that light and to trust implicitly in the Father's tender care and never-failing love. But it is difficult for us to see beyond the lonely hearthstone and vacant chair. Still believe she does begin to dimly grasp the comfort you are so eager for her to have. Ah, but if she only knew that I need just that to complete my happiness now. We cannot sorrow here as we did on earth because we have learned to know that the will of the Father is always tender and wise. But even heaven can never be complete for me while I know that my mother is forgetful of her many rare blessings, simply because I may not be with her in the flesh to share them. There is my father and the boys. Why, I am as truly hers still as they are. I often sit with them all, with her hand in mine or my arms around her, my dear, dear mother. Why must she see me to recognize this? But this is almost complaining, isn't it? Some day she will know all. We must be patient. As we walked on, talking of the earth life, still in many phases so dear to us, she asking eager questions, I answering as best I could, we saw a group of 4 people, 3 women and a man, standing under the trees a little to one side of the walk. The man's back was towards us, but we at once recognized the Master. The women were all strangers, and one of them seemed to have just arrived. The Savior held her hand as he talked with her, while all listened intently to his words. We regarded the group in silence as we slowly passed, not hoping for recognition from him at such a time, but just as we were opposite them, he turned and looked at us. He said nothing, but oh, that look, so full of tenderness and encouragement. It lifted us. It enthralled and exalted us as we walked on. Our clasped hands tightened, and unspeakable rapture flooded our hearts. We finished our walk in silence and sat down on the marble steps in the shadow of the overhanging trees. We sat close, side by side, and she laid her head on my shoulder while I rested my cheek on it. After a time I whispered, half to myself, "Was there ever such a look?" Instantly she raised her head and said eagerly, "You think so too? Oh, I was sure you would. It is always so. If he is too engaged to speak to you at that time, he just looks at you, and it is as though he had talked a long while with you. Is he not wonderful? Why, oh, why could we not know him on earth as we know him here?" "How long were you here before you met him?" I asked. "Oh, that is the wonderful part of it. He was the first face I looked at after I left the body. I felt bewildered when I first realized that I was free, and I stood for a moment confused. Then I saw him standing just beside me with that same look on his face. At first I felt timid and half afraid. Then he stretched out his hand to me and said gently, 'My child, I have come to take care of you. Trust me and do not be afraid.' Then I knew him, and all fear instantly left me, and I clung to him as I would have done to either of my brothers. He did not say much to me, but somehow I felt that he understood all of my thoughts. After a moment I asked, 'May I not remain a while with Mama? She's heartbroken.' 'Yes, dear child, as long as you desire,' he answered compassionately. 'Will you also remain?' I asked, because I felt I couldn't bear for him to leave me. He looked very much pleased and answered, 'Yes, I will never leave you till you are ready to come with me.' Then I went to Mama and I put my arms around her, and presently the Master too came and whispered words of comfort to her. I'm not sure she recognized our presence, though I felt she grew more calm. We stayed until all was over. I never left Mama an instant, except twice when I stole to poor little Hal's sick room when he was alone. I have always felt that he recognized my presence more than any of them. He lay so still and calm when I talked to him. He seemed to be listening. When they gathered for the last time around my casket, it seemed to me that I needed to speak, to show myself to them. Couldn't they for one instant have seen my living self standing so calmly in their midst? They would have forgotten forever the lifeless clay they had embalmed and beautified for the tomb. They would have known I was not there, but they would not recognize the truth. Last I pleaded with the Master to let me show myself once to them, but he said, "It is not the Father's will." After that, I accepted fully the Father's will, and soon thereafter he brought me here in his arms. And what a blessed life it is. I can only give a brief outline of our conversation on that happy day. It is too sacred to be scanned by curious eyes. We talked until the golden twilight fell, and we watched the little birds nestling in the vines, and heard afar the solemnly joyous notes of the angels' choral song, and joined in the hymn of praise. Later we went to my room and lay down on my couch for rest, and the last words I heard before sinking into heaven's blissful sleep were tenderly whispered, "Dear little mother, I'm so glad that you are here." More than once the question has been asked, was there night there? Emphatically, no. What, for want of a better word we may call day, was full of a glorious radiance, a rosy golden light, which was everywhere. There is no language known to mortals that can describe this marvelous glory. It flooded the sky. It was caught up and reflected in the waters. It filled all heaven with joy and all hearts with song. After a period much longer than our longest earthly day, this glory mellowed and softened until it became a glowing twilight full of peace. The children ceased their playing beneath the trees. The little birds nestled among the vines, and all who had been busy in various ways throughout the day sought rest and quiet. But there was no darkness, no dusky shadows even, only a restful softening of the glory. Chapter 9. Not long after this, my brother said,
"We will go to the grand auditorium this morning. It will be a rare day even here. Martin Luther is to talk on the Reformation, its causes and effects, and this will be supplemented by a talk from John Wesley. There may also be other speakers."
It was not the first time we had visited this great auditorium, although I have not mentioned it before. It stood on a slight prominence, and the mighty dome was supported by massive columns of alternate amethyst and jasper. There were no walls to the vast edifice, only the great dome and supporting columns. A broad platform of precious marbles, inlaid with crystals, rose from the center, and seats were sloped upward on three sides, forming an immense amphitheater. The seats were of cedar wood, highly polished, and in the back of the platform were heavy hangings of royal purple. An altar of solid pearl stood near the center of the platform. The great dome was deep and dark in its immensity, so that only the golden statues around its lower border were distinctly visible. When we entered, we found the building filled with people eagerly waiting for what was to follow. We soon were seated, and also waiting. Soft strains of melody floated about us from an invisible choir. Soon Martin Luther, in the prime of a vigorous manhood, ascended the steps and stood before us. It is not my purpose to dwell on his appearance, so familiar to us all, except to say that his great intellect and spiritual strength seemed to have added to his already powerful physique and made him a fit leader still, even in heavenly places. His discourse would fill a volume and could not be given even in outline in this brief sketch. He held us enthralled by the power of his will and his eloquence. When he was finished, John Wesley took his place, and the saintly beauty of his face, intensified by the heavenly light on it, was wonderful. His theme was God's love. And if in the earth life he dwelt on it with power, he now swept our souls with the fire of his exaltation until we were as if wax in his hands. He showed what that love had done for us, and how an eternity of thanksgiving and praise could never repay it. Silence, except for the faint, sweet melody of the unseen choir, rested on the vast audience for some time after he left. All seemed lost in contemplation of the themes so tenderly spoken. Then the heavy curtains in back of the platform parted, and a tall form, around which all the glory of heaven seemed to center, advanced to the middle of the platform. Instantly the vast concourse of souls stood to their feet and burst forth as with one voice into that grand anthem in which we had so often joined on earth. All hail the power of Jesus' name. Let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Such a grand chorus of voices, such unity, such harmony, such volume was never heard on earth. It rose, it swelled, it seemed to fill not only the great auditorium, but heaven, and still, above it all, we heard the voices of the angel choir, no longer breathing the soft, sweet melody, but bursting forth into triumphant praise. A flood of glory seemed to fill the place, and looking up, we beheld the great dome ablaze with golden light, and the angelic forms of the no longer invisible choir in its midst, with their heavenly harps and violins, and their faces only less radiant than that of him whose praise they sang. And in the middle, the Master, before whom all heaven bowed in adoration, stood with uplifted face and kingly stature, the very God of earth and heaven. He was the center of all light, and a divine radiance surrounded him that was beyond compare. As the hymn of praise and adoration ceased, all sank slowly to their knees, every head bowed and every face covered, as the angel choir changed the familiar words. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. slowly the voices died away, and a holy silence fell upon us. Soon, slowly and reverently, all stood and resumed their places. No, not all. Sweet Mary Bates had accompanied us to the sanctuary, and I now noticed that she alone still knelt, with clasped hands and radiant uplifted face, her lovely eyes fixed on the Savior as he stood before us. She was so rapt, I dared not disturb her. But in a moment, the Master turned and met her adoring eyes with such a look of loving recognition that as he turned his head again, she quietly resumed her seat beside me, slipping her little hand into mine with all the confidence of a child who feels sure it is understood to the utmost. As I looked on the glorious form before us, clothed in all the majesty of the Godhead, my heart tremblingly asked, "Can this indeed be the Christ man whom Pilate condemned to die a humiliating death on the cross?" I could not accept it. It seemed impossible that any man, however vile, could be blind to the divinity so plainly revealed in him. Then the Savior began to speak, and the sweetness of his voice was far beyond the melody of the heavenly choir. And his gracious words, if only I could dared transcribe them as they fell from his lips. Earth has no language by which I could convey their lofty meaning. He first touched lightly on the earth life and showed so wonderfully the link of light uniting the two lives, the past with the present. Then he explained to us some of the mysteries of this blessed life and pointed out the joyous duties just before us. When he stopped, we sat with bowed heads as he left. Our hearts were so full, our souls so uplifted, our spirits so exalted, our whole being so permeated with his divinity that we stood. We left the place silently and reverently, each bearing a heart filled with higher and more divine aspirations and clearer views of the blessed life upon which we were permitted to enter. Suffice it to say that no joy we know on earth, however rare, however sacred, can be more than the faintest shadow of the joy we will find in heaven. No dream of rapture approaches the bliss of one moment in that world. There is no sorrow, no pain, no sickness, no death, no partings, no disappointments, no tears, but those of joy. No broken dreams, no mislaid plans, no night, nor storm, nor shadows even, but light and joy and love and peace and rest forever and ever. Amen. And again, my heart says reverently, Amen. Chapter 10. As the days passed, I found my desires often led me to the sacred lake, sometimes alone, sometimes with one or more of my own family circle, my revered father and precious mother, my dear brother and sister, and many beloved friends. It was always an inspiration to me, and very uplifting. I never could grow familiar enough with it to overcome the first great awe with which it inspired me. But I found that the oftener I bathed or floated and slept in its current, the stronger I grew in spirit, and the more clearly I comprehended the mysteries of the world about me. My almost daily discussion with the dear ones of our home life, whom I had been separated from for so long, served to restore to me the home feeling that had been the greatest solace of my mortal life. I began to realize that this was indeed the true life, instead of that probationary life which we had always regarded as such. I think it was the day after my return from my first visit to earth that as I had started to cross the grass lying between my father's house and my own, that I heard my name called affectionately. I turned and saw a tall, fine-looking man approaching, whose uncovered head was silvery white, and whose deep blue eyes looked happily and tenderly into mine as he drew near. "Oliver!" I cried with outstretched hands of welcome. It was the husband of my sister and always dearly loved. "I didn't know you had come until our father told me. It is delightful to have you here. It seems more like the old life to see you than any of the others who are here. We were together so much during the last years of my stay," he said, grasping my hands warmly. "Where are you going now? Can you come with me for a while? I was thinking only a few days ago how much I wished you could be here a little while before Lou came. You know her taste so well, and now here you are. So often our unspoken wishes are thus gratified in heaven." "Is my dear sister-in-law coming soon?" I asked, a little later. "That I cannot confidently say, but you know the years of the earth life are passing, and coming cannot be much longer delayed. Can you come with me now?" "Gladly," I said, turning to walk with him. "It is not far from here," he said, "just where the river bends. Lou loves the water so I chose that spot in preference to one even nearer your home." "This is truly enchanting," I said as we drew near the place. "I have not been this way before." "I want you to see the river from her room windows," he said. "I know you will enjoy it." We entered the truly beautiful house, built of the purest white granite, so hidden in the foliage and flower-laden trees that from some places only glimpses of its fine proportions could be seen. "She loves flowers so much. Don't you think she will enjoy these trees?" "Beyond everything," I answered. We passed through several delightful rooms on the lower floor and ascended the stairway, which, in itself, was a dream of beauty. As we entered the room he was so anxious, I stopped on the threshold with an exclamation of delight, while he stood watching with keen enjoyment the expression on my face. "It is the most delightful room I have ever seen," I said excitedly. The framework of couches, chairs, and desk was of pure and spotless pearl, upholstered in dim gold. There were soft rugs and draperies everywhere. Through the low windows opening on a flower-wreathed balcony, there was an enchanting view of the broad, smooth river below that again caught my breath in delight. 1,000 exquisite tints from the heavens above were reflected on the tranquil waters, and a boat floating on the current was perfectly mirrored in the opal-tinted ripples. Far across the shining waters the celestial hills rose, with domes and pillared temples and sparkling fountains perceptible everywhere. When I at last turned from this entrancing view, I saw on the opposite wall, smiling down on me, the same divine face that I daily looked on in my own room at home. We descended the stairs without a word, and then I could only falter as I said, "Only heaven could give such perfection in everything." Oliver pressed my hand and let me depart without a word. Many months by earthly time had passed since that day, and many times I visited that lovely home and had lovely talks with Oliver. I could suggest nothing that would add to the beauty of the place, but we talked of it and planned for and anticipated the joy of Lou's coming. One day I found him absent, and though I waited for his return, he didn't come. I had not seen him in several days and decided he had been sent on some mission by the master. As I walked towards our home, I met a group of happy young girls and boys of different ages on the way back from where I had come. They had their arms full of the most beautiful flowers. As they came closer, I saw they were the grandchildren of my dear Lou. There was Stanley, Mary, David, Lee, and little Ruth. As soon as they saw me, they began to shout, "Grandma's coming! Grandma is coming! We are taking flowers to scatter everywhere. We are so glad!" "How do you know she is coming, children? I have just been to the house and no one is there." "But she is coming," said little Lee. "We had a message from Grandpa, and he is bringing her." "Then I will tell the others, and we will all welcome her," I said. With great joy in my heart, I hastened toward my father's house. I found them waiting for me, full of joyful expectation. "Yes, we have also had word," said my father, "and we were only waiting for your return so we might go together." "Then I will go for Brother Frank so he can come with us too," I said.
"He is here,"
said a genial voice, and looking up, I saw him at the door. "Colonel Sprague is always present when he is needed," said my father. So we set forth to welcome this dearly loved one to her home. My father, my mother and sister, Jody, my brother, the doctor, and his two fair daughters, my Aunt Gray, her son Martin, and his wife and daughter, my brother Frank, and I. As we approached the house, we heard the sound of joyous voices, and looking in, we saw Lou standing in the room, her husband's arm around her and the happy grandchildren buzzing around like hummingbirds among the flowers. But what was this? Could this radiant creature with smooth brow and happy eyes be the pale, wan woman I had last seen, so bowed with suffering and sorrow? Yes, it was Lou. And as she was a full 30 years ago, with the bloom of health on her face and the light of youth in her tender eyes. I drew back into the shadow of the vines and let the others precede me, for my heart was full of a strange, triumphant joy. This truly was the victory over death, so surely promised by our risen Lord. I watched the happy greetings and the way she took each one into her tender arms. When one by one she had greeted and embraced them all, I saw her turn and look wistfully around, then whisper to my father, "Is not my little sister-in-law here?" I could wait no longer and rushed to her side, crying, "Here I am! Welcome!" She hugged me and showered me with kisses while I returned each one laughing and crying for gladness that she had come at last. Oh, what a family reunion inside the walls of heaven! How its happiness was heightened by the knowledge, not the hope, that we should never be apart again. Oliver looked on with proud and happy eyes. The hour which he had longed and waited for had come to him at last. His home life would now be complete forevermore. I told him how I had waited for him that day, and he said, "We saw you as you left the house, but were too far away to call. I had taken her into the river, and she looked at and admired the house before she even knew it was our home." What did she do when she saw her lovely room? Cried like a child, and clung to me, saying, "This more than repays us for the lost home of earth. If the children had not come, I think she would have been at that window still," he said happily, laughing. "I am glad you had her all to yourself at first," I whispered. "You deserve that happiness if any man ever did." He smiled gratefully and looked over at his wife, where she stood the center of a happy group. "Doesn't she look young to you, Oliver?" I asked. The years rolled from her like a mask as we sat beneath the water in the river. Ah, truly, in those life-giving waters we do all renew our youth. But she became at once uncommonly fair and young. "Her coming has brought youth to you also," I said, noting his fresh complexion and sparkling eyes. "But I hope it will not change your silver hair, for that is a crown of glory." He looked at me critically for a moment and then said, "I wonder if you realize the change that has come to you in this place." "Me?" I said, a little startled. "I confess I have not once thought of my personal appearance. I realize what, through the Father's mercy, this life has done for me spiritually, but as for the other, I've never given it an instant's thought." "The change is fully as great in your case as in Lou's, though with you the change has been more gradual," he said. I felt a strange thrill of joy that when my dear husband should come to me, he would find me with the freshness and comeliness of our earlier years. It was a sweet thought, and my heart was full of gratitude to the Father for this further evidence of his loving care. So we talked together as the hours sped by, until my father said, "Come now, we must not forget that Lou needs rest the first day in her new home. Let us leave her and her happy husband to their new-found bliss." So with light hearts we went our way, and left them to spend their first hours in heaven together. Chapter 11. After we had left my parents and friends on our return from our welcome to Lou, Frank hastened away on some mission, and I walked on alone toward the sacred lake. I felt the need of a rest in its soothing waters after the exciting events of the day. I had visited the lake before in the early morning hours. It was now a little past noontide of the heavenly day, and very few people lingered on the shore. The boats that sped across its calm surface seemed to be filled with those intent on some duty, rather than simply pleasure seekers. I walked slowly down into the water, and soon found myself floating, as before, in mid-current. The wonderful prismatic rays that in the early morning were such a marvel now blended into a golden glory, with different shades of rose and purple flashing across their splendor. To me it seemed even more beautiful than the rainbow tints. I wondered what its evening glories would be, and resolved to come at some glowing twilight and see if they would not remind me of the calm hours of life's closing day. I heard the chimes from the silver bell of the great city ringing an anthem as I lay there, and its notes seemed to chant clearly, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty." The waters took up the song, and 1,000 waves around me responded, "Holy, holy, holy." The notes seemed to vibrate on the waves, producing a wondrously harmonious effect. The front row in the battalion of advancing waves softly chanted, "Holy," as they passed onward. Immediately the second roll of waves took up the word that the first seemed to have dropped as it echoed the second, "Holy, in the divine chorus. Then it, too, passed onward to take up the second note as the third advancing column caught the first. And so it passed and echoed from wave to wave until it seemed millions of tiny waves about me had taken up and were bearing their part in this grand crescendo, this wonderful anthem. Language fails me. I cannot hope to convey to others this experience as it came to me. It was grand, wonderful, overpowering. I lay and listened until my whole being was filled with this divine melody, and I seemed to be a part of the great chorus. Then I, too, joined in with a full heart in the thrilling song of praise. I found that, contrary to my usual custom, I floated rapidly away from the shore where I had entered the water, and after a time was conscious that I was approaching a portion of the lake's shore I had never visited. Refreshed and invigorated, I walked up the sloping bank to find myself in the midst of a lovely suburban village, similar to the one where our home was situated. There was some difference in the architecture or construction of the houses, though they were no less beautiful than others I had seen. Many were constructed of polished woods and somewhat resembled the finest of the chalets one sees in Switzerland, though far surpassing them in all that gives pleasure to the artistic eye. As I wandered on, feasting my eyes on the lovely views around me, I was particularly pleased by the appearance of an unusually attractive house. Its broad verandas almost overhung the waters of the lake, the wide, low steps running on one side of the house almost to the water's edge. Several graceful swans were leisurely drifting about with the current, and a bird similar to our southern mockingbird, but with softer voice, was singing and swinging in the low branches overhead. There were many larger and more imposing villas near, but none possessed, for me, the charm of this sweet home. Beneath one of the large flowering trees close by this cottage home, I saw a woman sitting, weaving, with her delicate hands, apparently without shuttle or needle, a snow-white gossamer-like fabric that fell in a soft, fleecy heap at her side as the work progressed. She was so very small in stature that at first glance I thought she was a child, but closer scrutiny showed her to be a mature woman, though with the glow of youth still on her smooth cheek. Something familiar in her gestures, rather than her appearance, caused me to feel that it was not the first time we had met. Growing accustomed now to the delightful surprises that met me everywhere in this world of rare delights, I drew near to approach her when, before I could speak, she looked up, and the doubt was gone. "Maggie!" "Mrs. Sprague, dear!" We cried simultaneously as, dropping her work, she stepped quickly up to greet me. Our greeting was warm, and her sweet face glowed with a welcome that reminded me of the happy days when we had met in the years long gone by. "Now I know why I was directed this way today. To find you, dear," I said as we sat side by side, talking as we never had talked on earth. The sweet shyness of her mortal life had melted away in the balmy air of heaven. "What is this lovely fabric you are weaving?" I asked, lifting the silken, fleecy web in my fingers as I spoke. "Some draperies for Nellie's room," she said. "You know, we two have lived alone together so much, I thought it would seem more like home to her, to us both, if we did the same thing here. So this cottage is our own special home, just a step from Marie's," she said as she pointed to an imposing house a few yards away. "And I am fitting it up as daintily as I can, especially her room." "Oh, let me help you, Maggie," I said. "It would be such a pleasure to me." She hesitated an instant with something of the old-time shyness, and then said, "That is so like you, dear Mrs. Sprague. I have my heart set on doing Nellie's room entirely by myself. There's no hurry about it, you know, but if you really would enjoy it, I would love to have you help me in the other rooms." "And will you teach me how to weave these delicate hangings?" "Yes, oh yes, indeed. Shall I give you your first lesson now?" Lifting the dainty thread, she showed me how to toss and wind it through my fingers till it fell away in shining folds. It was very light and fascinating work, and I soon was weaving it almost as rapidly as she did. My happy thought was, now I can help Carol, as I saw the shimmering fabric grow beneath my hands. Tomorrow I will go and show him how beautifully we can drape the doors and windows. So, in heaven, our first thought ever is to give pleasure to others. "You are an apt scholar, and what a charming hour you have given me," said Maggie, laughing happily. "What a charming hour you have given me, my dear," I answered. When we parted, it was with the understanding that every little while I was to repeat the visit. When I urged her likewise to come visit me, the old-time shyness again appeared as she said, "Oh, they are all strangers to me, and here we shall be entirely alone. You come to me." So I agreed. As in heaven, we never seek to gain reluctant consent for any pleasure, however dear. And many were the happy hours spent with her in the cottage by the lake. Chapter 12. On one of my walks, I chanced on a scene that brought to mind what May had said to me about the Saviour's love for little children. I found our Master sitting beneath one of the flowering trees on the lake shore with about a dozen children of all ages clustered around him. One dainty little tot, not more than a year old, was nestled in his arms with her sunny head resting confidingly on his chest, her tiny hands filled with the lovely water lilies that floated everywhere on the waters. She was too young to realize how great her privilege was, but seemed to be enjoying his care to the utmost. The others sat at his feet, or leaned on his knees. One dear little fellow with earnest eyes stood by him, leaning on his shoulder, while the Master's right arm encircled him. Every eye was fixed eagerly on Jesus, and each child appeared alert to catch every word he said. He seemed to be telling them some very absorbing story adapted to their childish taste and capacities. I sat down on the grass with a group of people a little removed from the children and tried to hear what he was saying, but we were too far away to catch more than a sentence now and then. In heaven, one never intrudes on another's privileges or pleasures. So we simply enjoyed the smiles and eager questions and exclamations of the children and gathered a little of the tenor of the story from the disjointed sentences which floated to us.
"A little child lost in the woods of the lower world,"
we heard the Master say in response to the inquiring looks of the interested children.
"Lions and bears,"
came later on. "Where was his papa?" asked an anxious voice. We could not hear the reply, but soon a little fellow leaning on the Saviour's knee said confidently, "No lions and bears up here."
"No. Nothing to harm or frighten my little children here,"
he replied. Then as the story deepened and grew in interest and the children pressed more closely around the Master, he turned with a sweet smile and we could see an increased pressure of the encircling arm to the little fellow with the earnest eyes who leaned on his shoulder and said,
"What, Leslie, would you have done then?"
With a bright light in his eyes and a flush on his fair cheek, the child answered quickly and emphatically, "I would have prayed to you and asked you to close the lion's mouth as you did for Daniel, and you would have done it." I thought, if only his mother and father could see the look the beloved master cast on their boy as he made his brave reply, they would be comforted, even for the absence of their darling. Lost in these thoughts, I didn't hear anything more that passed between them until an ecstatic shout from the little folks proclaimed how satisfactorily the story had ended. Looking up, I saw the Savior walking on with the baby still in his arms and the children trooping around him. Of such is the kingdom of heaven. How well he understood, how much he loved them. I too stood up and started home. I had not gone far before I met Frank, who greeted me with,
"I'm on my way to the city by the lake. Will you come with me?"
"I've been wanting to visit the city, but I waited until you thought it wise for me to go," I answered.
"You are growing so fast in the knowledge of heavenly ways, I think I might venture to take you almost anywhere with me now. You acquired the knowledge for the very love of it, and not because you feel it your duty to know what we would have you learn. Your eagerness to gather truth and at the same time your patient submission and waiting, often when I know the trial is great, have won you much praise and love from our dear Master, who watches eagerly the progress of us all in the divine life. I think it only right that you should know this. We need encouragement here as well as in the earth life, though in a different way. I am telling you this by divine permission. I don't think it will be long before he trusts you with a mission. He's not told me this. I am saying this by my own thinking."
It would be impossible for me to convey in the language of earth the impression these words of commendation left on me. They were so unexpected, so unforeseen. I had gone on, as my brother said, eagerly gathering the knowledge imparted to me, with a genuine love for the study of all things pertaining to the heavenly life, without a thought that I in any way deserved commendation for doing so. Now I had won the praise of the Master himself. The happiness seemed almost more than I had strength to bear. My brother, my dear brother, was all I could say in my deep joy. Then stopping suddenly and looking up into Frank's face with grateful tears, he said,
"I am so glad for you, little sister. There are, you see, rewards in heaven. It does my soul good that you have unconsciously won one of these so soon."
I wish I could record in detail the precious words of wisdom that fell from his lips. I wish that I might recount minutely the events of that wonderful life as it was unfolded to me day by day, but I can only say I may not. When I undertook to make a record of that never-to-be-forgotten time, I did not realize how many serious difficulties I would have to encounter, how often I would have to pause and consider if I might really reveal this truth or paint that scene as it appeared to me. The very heart has often been left out of some wonderful scene I was attempting to describe because I found I dared not reveal its sacred secret. I realized painfully that the narrative, as I am forced to give it, falls infinitely short of what I hoped to make it when I began. But bear with me. It is no fancy sketch I am drawing, but the veritable life beyond, as it appeared to me when the exalted spirit rose triumphant over the impoverished flesh made slavishly subservient through suffering. My brother and I walked slowly back to the margin of the lake, where we stepped into a boat lying near the shore, and were at once transported to the other side of the lake, where we landed on a marble terrace, the entrance to the city by the lake. I never knew by what power these boats were propelled. There were no oarsmen, no engine, no sails on the one in which we crossed the water. It moved steadily onward until we were safely delivered to our destination. Luxuriously cushioned seats were all around it, and on one of them lay a musical instrument, something like a violin, although it had no bow, but seemed to be played by the fingers alone. Upon another seat lay a book. I picked it up and opened it. It seemed to be a continuation of that book that had stirred and thrilled millions in the mortal life, The Greatest Thing in the World. As I glanced through it while we journeyed, I grasped the truth that this great mind already had grappled with the mighty things of eternity and given food to mortals, even as he had to those in mortal life in the years gone by. I was aroused from my thoughts by the boat touching the marble terrace, and found my brother already standing, waiting to help me to the shore. Walking up a slight hill, we found ourselves in a broad street that led into the heart of the city. The streets were all very broad and smooth and paved with marble and precious stones of every kind. Though they were full of people intent on various duties, not an atom of debris or even dust was visible anywhere. There seemed to be vast business houses of many kinds, though I saw nothing resembling our large retail establishments. There were many colleges and schools, many book and music stores and publishing houses, several large manufacturing facilities where I learned were spun the fine silken threads of many colors that were so extensively used in the weaving of the draperies I've already mentioned. There were art rooms, picture galleries and libraries, and many lecture halls and vast auditoriums, but I saw no churches of any kind. At first, this somewhat confused me until I remembered that there are no creeds in heaven, but that all worship together in harmony and love, the children of one and the same loving Father. I thought, what a pity that this fact, if no other in heaven, could only be proclaimed to the inhabitants of earth. How it would do away with the petty contentions, jealousies, and rivalries of the church militant. No creeds in heaven, no controverted points of doctrine, no charges of heresy brought by one professed Christian against another. No building up of one denomination upon the ruins or downfall of a different sect, but one great universal brotherhood whose head is Christ and whose cornerstone is love. I thought of the day we had listened in the great auditorium at home to the divine address of our beloved Master, of the bowed heads and uplifted voices of that vast multitude, as every voice joined in the glorious anthem, "Crown him Lord of all." And I could have wept to think of the faces that must someday be bowed in shame when they remember how often they have in mortal life said to a brother Christian, "Stand aside, I am holier than thou." We found no dwelling houses anywhere in the midst of the city until we came to the suburbs. Here they stood in great magnificence and splendor. But one pleasing fact was that every home had its large yard full of trees and flowers and pleasant walks. Indeed, it was everywhere outside the business center of town, like one vast park dotted with lovely houses. There was much that charmed, much that surprised me in this great city that I can never forget. We found in one place a very large park, with walks and drives and fountains and miniature lakes and shaded seats, but no dwellings or buildings of any kind, except an immense circular open temple, capable of seating many hundreds, and where my brother told me the highest angelic choir assembled at a certain hour daily, and rendered the oratorios written by the great musical composers of earth and heaven. It had just departed, and the crowd who had enjoyed its divine music, yet lingered as though unwilling to leave a spot so hallowed. My brother said,
"We will remember the hour and come again when we can hear them."
Chapter 13. Still passing through the park, we came out on the open country and walked some distance through flowery meadows and undulating plains. We entered a vast forest whose great trees towered above us like swaying giants. The day was almost over, the day so full of joy and glad surprises and happy hours. Full as it had been, I felt there was still something left for me, deeply hidden in the twilight valley of the day. Something that held my soul in awe as the last moments preceding the Holy Sacrament. My brother walked by me, absorbed in silent thought. I did not ask where we were going at that unusual hour so far from home, for fear and doubt and questionings no longer worried the quiet of my soul. Although the forest was dense, the golden glow of the twilight rested beneath the trees and sifted down through the quivering branches overhead, as though falling through the windows of some grand cathedral. We emerged from the forest upon a vast plain that stretched out into unlimited space before us, and far away we faintly heard the thunder of the breaking waves of the immortal sea, which I had heard so much about, but not yet seen. But for their faint and distant reverberations, the silence was intense around us. We stood for a moment on the verge of the forest, then walked a few steps into the plain. I became aware that immediately to our right, the ground rose into quite an elevation, and as I turned there was a bewildering sight that eternal years of earth and heaven can never erase. On the summit of this gentle slope, a temple stood, whose vast dome, massive pillars, and solid walls were of pure pearl, and through its great mullioned windows shone a white radiance that swallowed up the golden glow of the twilight and made it its own. I didn't say a word, or hide my face as at former revelations, but I sank slowly to my knees, and crossing my hands on my chest, with uplifted face, stilled heart, and silent lips, laid my whole being in worship at his feet. How long I knelt, I don't know. Even immortal life seemed lost before that greatest of celestial mysteries. My brother, who had been silently kneeling beside me, stood up, and lifting me to my feet, whispered,
"Come."
I felt rather than saw that his face was colorless with the depth of his emotion, and I yielded to his guidance in silence. There was a long flight of low, broad steps in shades of rose from almost where we stood to the very door of the temple. They, too, were of solid pearl, bordered on either side by channels paved with golden stones through which coursed crystal waters that met and mingled in one stream far out on the plain. Ascending the steps, we entered the temple, and for a moment stood in silence. I do not know how it was, but in that brief instant, it may have been longer than I knew, every detail of that wonderful interior was fastened upon my memory as a scene is photographed on the artist's plate. Previously, it had taken repeated visits to a room to enable me to describe it correctly in detail, but this, in a lightning's flash, was stamped on the tablet of my memory indelibly for all time. Yes, for eternity. The immense dome, at that moment filled with a luminous cloud, was upheld by 3 rows of massive pillars of gold. The walls and floor were of pearl, as was the great platform that filled at least 1/3 of the temple on the eastern side. There were no seats of any kind. The great golden pillars stood like rows of sentinels on the shining floor. A railing of gold ran entirely around the platform on 3 sides, so that it was inaccessible from the body of the temple. Beneath this railing, on the temple floor, a kneeling step passed around the platform, also of pearl. In the center of the platform, an immense altar of gold arose, supported by seraphs of gold with outspread wings, one at each corner, and underneath it, in a great pearl basin, a fountain of sparkling water played. I knew intuitively it was the source of the magical river that flowed through the gardens of heaven and took us from the last stains of death and sin. Nothing living besides us was within the temple, except 2 people who knelt with bowed heads beside the altar rail on the far side. But by the altar stood 4 angels, one on each side, dressed in flowing garments of white, with long, slim trumpets of gold, lifted in their hands as though waiting in expectancy the signal for their trumpet call. Long draperies of silvery gossamer hung in heavy folds in back of the altar platform. Suddenly, just as we looked, we saw the draperies tremble and glow until a radiance far beyond the splendor of the midday sun shone through them, and the entire temple was filled with the glory of the Lord. We saw in the midst of the luminous cloud that filled the dome the forms of angelic harpers, and as we dropped with bowed heads beside the altar rail and hid our faces from the brightness of his coming, we heard the trumpet call of the 4 angels by the altar and the voices of the celestial harpers as they sang, "Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty. All thy works shall praise thy name in earth and sky and sea. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in 3 persons, blessed Trinity. Amen." The voices softly died away. The last notes of the golden trumpets had sounded, and there was silence in heaven. We knew that the visible glory of the Lord was, for the present, withdrawn from the temple, which is his throne. Still we knelt with bowed heads in silent worship before him. When we at last stood, I did not lift my eyes while within the temple. I desired it to remain upon my memory as it appeared when filled with his glory. We walked some time in silence as I leaned on my brother's arm, for I still trembled with emotion. I was surprised that we didn't return into the forest, but went farther out to the plain. When I saw that we approached the joining of the 2 streams which issued from the fountain beneath the altar, I began to understand that we would return by way of the river instead of by forest or lake. We reached the stream and stepped into a boat that was there. We passed through beautiful scenery that I had not seen before, and which I resolved I would visit in the future when leisure from my daily duties would permit. Lovely villas surrounded by beautiful grounds stretching directly up from the water's edge lay on both sides of the river and formed a panorama which one would never tire of seeing. Toward the end of the journey, we passed by Lou's lovely home, and we could plainly see her and her husband enjoying the scene with enraptured eyes from the window of her own room. My brother and I were both silent the greater part of the time during our journey home, though each noted the signs of domestic life which surrounded us on every side. The verandas and steps of the homes we passed were full of their happy inhabitants. Glad voices could be constantly heard, and merry shouts of laughter came from the throngs of little children playing everywhere on the flowery lawns. Once I broke our silence by saying to my brother, I have been delightfully surprised more than once to hear the familiar songs of earth reproduced in heaven, but never more so than I was today. That hymn has long been a favorite of mine.
These happy surprises do not come by chance. One of the delights of this rare life is that no occasion is ever overlooked for reproducing here the pure enjoyments of our mortal life. It is the Father's pleasure to make us realize that this existence is but a continuance of the former life, only without its imperfections and its cares.
Frank, I believe you are the only one of our friends here who has never questioned me about the dear ones left behind. Why is that? He smiled a happy smile as he answered,
Perhaps it's because I already know more than you could tell me.
I wondered if that was not so, I said, for I remembered well how my father had said, in speaking of my brother on the first day of my coming, he stands very near to the Master. And I knew how often he was sent upon missions to the world below. On our return home, I lay down on my couch with a heart overflowing with joy and gratitude and love beyond the power of expression. It seemed to me the tenderness in the divine eyes that looked down on me from the wall was deeper and purer, holier than it had ever been before. I will reach the standard of perfection you have set for me, my Savior. I faltered with hands uplifted to him. If it takes all my life in heaven and all the help from all the angels of light to accomplish it, and with these words on my lips and his tender eyes resting on me, I sank into the blissful rest of heaven. Chapter 14. So much occurred, and so rapidly, from the very hour of my entrance within the beautiful gates, that it is impossible for me to transcribe it all. I have been able only to cull here and there incidents that happen day by day, and in doing so, many things I would gladly have related have unconsciously been omitted. In the many dear friends I met, only a very few have been mentioned, due to the fact that such meetings are so similar in many respects that the constant repetition in detail would have become wearisome. I have aimed principally to relate the incidents that would show the beautiful domestic life in that happy world, to make apparent the reverence and love all hearts feel toward the blessed Trinity for every good and perfect gift, and to show the marvelous power of Christ's love, even in the life beyond the grave. This world, strange and new to me, held multitudes of those I had loved in years gone by, and there was scarcely an hour that did not renew for me the ties that once were severed in the mortal life. I remember that as I was walking one day in the neighborhood of Mrs. Wickham's home, shortly after my first visit there, I was attracted by an unpretentious but very beautiful house, almost hidden by luxuriant, climbing rose vines whose flowers of creamy whiteness were beyond compare with any roses I had yet seen in earth or heaven. Meeting Mrs. Wickham, I pointed to the house and asked, "Who lives there?" "Suppose we go over and see," she said. "Is it anyone I know?" I asked. "I fancy so. See, someone is at the door now, as if they were expecting you." I crossed over the snowy walk and flowery grass, for the house stood at an angle formed by two paths crossing almost opposite Mrs. Wickham's, and before I could go up the steps, I found myself in the embrace of two loving arms. "Bertha Sprague, I was sure it was you when I saw you go to Mrs. Wickham's a day or two ago. Did she tell you I lived here?" "She had no opportunity until today," I said, "but dear Aunt Anne, I would have found you soon. I am sure you know that." "Yes, I'm sure you would." Then I recounted to her some of my visit to Mrs. Wickham's that eventful day. She listened with her dear face full of sympathy, then said, "There, dear, you need not tell me. I already know. When the Master comes to gladden my eyes, I have no thought or care for anything beyond for days and days. Oh, the joy, the peace of knowing I am safe in this blessed haven. How far beyond all our earthly dreams is this divine life." She sat for a moment lost in thought, and then said wistfully, "Now, tell me of my children. Are they coming?" I gladdened her heart with all the cheering news I could bring of her loved ones, and so we talked the hours away, recalling many sweet memories of the earth life, of friends and home and family ties, and looking forward to the future coming to us, of those whom even the joys of heaven could not banish from our hearts. Then there was another evening, as the soft twilight fell and many of our dear home circle were gathered with us in the great flower room. We heard a step on the veranda, and as my brother went to the door, a gentle voice said, "Is Mrs. Sprague really here?"
She is really here. Come and see for yourself.
And sweet Mary Green entered the room. "I'm so glad to welcome you home," she said, coming to me with extended hands and looking into mine with her tender, earnest eyes. "Oh, my precious girl," I cried, "I've been asking about you and longing to see you. I could scarcely wait to reach here when I heard that you had come. Now, tell me everything, everything," she said as we sat down close to one another. Every individual member of her home circle was discussed, and she recounted to me many incidents that occurred between her mother and I when talking of her passing. "I was often so close I could have touched you with my hand had the needed power been given," she explained. After a long, close talk, I took her to the library, where the rest had gone to examine a new book just received that day. I introduced her to them as the daughter of dear friends still on earth, confident of the welcome she would receive. My youngest sister and she found they had much in common, and I was glad to think that they would see much of each other in the coming days. There was no measurement of time as we measure it here, although many still spoke in the old-time language of months and days and years. I have no way of describing it as it seemed to me then. There were periods and allotted times. There were hours for happy duties, hours for joyful pleasures, and hours for holy praise. I only know it was all harmony, all joy, all peace, and at all times, in all conditions. Chapter 15. The current of my life flowed on in the heavenly ways until the months began to lengthen into years, and my daily studies ascended higher in the scale of celestial mysteries. I never wearied of study, though much was taught and gained through the medium of observation on the journeys that I was permitted to take with my brother into different parts of the heavenly kingdom. I never lacked time for social pleasures and enjoyments, for there is no clashing of duties, no unfulfilled desires, no vain strivings for the unattainable in that life as in the life of earth. Many precious hours of discussion were spent in my dear father's home, and sometimes on rare occasions I was permitted to accompany him to his field of labor and assist him in instructing those lately come into the new life with little or no preparation for its duties and responsibilities. On one occasion, he said to me, "I have the most difficult problem to deal with I have yet met in this work. It is how to enlighten and help a man who suddenly plunged from an apparently honorable life into the depths of crime. I have never been able to get him to accompany me to the river where these earthly cobwebs would be swept from his poor brain, his excuse always being that God's mercy is so great in allowing him inside heaven's gates at all, that he is content to remain always in its lowest scale of enjoyment and life. No argument or teaching so far can make him alter his decision. He was led astray by infatuation for a strange woman and killed his aged mother in order to secure her jewels for this wretched creature. He was executed for the crime, of which in the end he sincerely repented, but he left life with all the horror of the deed clinging to his soul. Has he seen his mother since coming here? Does she know of his arrival? No, she is entirely alone in this world, and it was not thought wise to tell her of his coming until his soul was in a better condition to receive her. He was an only child and has all the elements of refinement, but he was completely under the control of this vile, though fascinating woman. It is said that she drugged his wine and incited him to do the dreadful deed while under its influence because of her hatred for his mother, who influenced him against her. When he came out from under the influence of the wine, he was horrified at what he had done, and his infatuation for the woman turned to loathing. But alas, too late. He refused to see her during his entire incarceration. How long was he in prison? Almost a year. Has he seen the Christ? No, he begs not to see him. He is very repentant and grateful to be saved from the wrath he feels was his just punishment. But though he is conscious that his sin is forgiven, he does not yet feel that he can ever stand in the presence of the Holy One. And here, as upon earth, each must be willing to receive him. His presence is never given undesired. I have not yet appealed for higher help. My ambition is to lead these weak souls upward through the strength entrusted to me. Can you suggest anything that would possibly reach him? His mother. May I bring her? He thought a moment reflectively and then said, A woman's intuition, yes. Bring her. I soon was on my way. I found the poor woman, laid the facts gently before her, and waited for her decision. There was no hesitancy on her part. In an instant she said, My poor boy, certainly, I will go with you at once. We found my father waiting for us and went immediately to the great home, where these students, as we called them, stayed. It was a beautiful great building in the midst of a park with shaded walks and fountains and flowers everywhere. To one just freed from earth, it seemed a paradise indeed. But to those of us who had tasted heaven's rarer joys, something was wanting. We missed the lovely individual homes, the little children playing on the lawns, the music of the angel choir. It was tame indeed beside the pleasures we had tasted. We found the young man seated beneath one of the flower-laden trees, intently reading a book that my father had left with him. There was a peaceful look on his pale face, but it was rather the look of patient resignation than of ardent joy. His mother approached him alone. My father and I remained in the background. After a minute, he glanced up and saw his mother standing near him. A startled look came on his face, and he stood to his feet. She extended her arms to him and cried out, John, my dear boy, come home with me. I need you. That was all. It With a low cry, he knelt at her feet and clasped her knees, sobbing, "Mother, Mother." She stooped and put her arms around him. She drew his head gently to her breast and showered kisses on his bowed head. Oh, the warm mother love, the same in earth and heaven. Only the Christ love can exceed it. Here was this once outraged mother, sent into eternity by the hands of a son who should have shielded and sustained her, bending above her repentant son, her heart overflowing with love. I saw my father turn his head to conceal his emotion, and I knew my own eyes were wet. My father had explained to the mother that the first thing to be accomplished was to get her son to the river, so we now heard her say gently, "Come, John, take the first step upward for your mother's sake, that in time I may have the joy of seeing you in our own home. Come, John, come with mother." She gently drew him, and to our great joy, we saw him rise and go with her, and their steps led them to the river. They walked hand in hand, and as far as we could see them, they seemed to be soothing and comforting him. "Thank God," my father said fervently. "There will be no further trouble now. When they return, he will see with clearer vision." And so it proved to be. After this, by divine permission, I became much of the time a co-laborer with my father, and greatly enjoyed his company and his instruction much oftener than I otherwise would have been able. Chapter 16. One evening, some 3 years as counted by the calendar on earth, after I was fully involved with the joys and duties of the heavenly life, I sat resting on the upper veranda of our home after a somewhat arduous journey to a distant city. From this part of the veranda we caught rare glimpses of the river through the overhanging branches of the trees, and just below us, a short distance away, we could see the happy children at play on the lawn. My brother came to find me, and lay on a lounge nearby, motionless and silent. He looked as tired as one can ever look in that life, but I didn't feel anxious for him. He had been absent on some earth mission much of the time for many days, and I knew from experience that some of the fatigue and care of earth will cling to us on such occasions until we are restored by heaven's balmy air and life-giving waters. He had not told me, as he sometimes did, where his mission had led him, and I had not asked, feeling sure he would tell me if I should know. My own duties lately had been unusually responsible, leading me daily to a distant part of the heavenly kingdom, so I had not visited the beloved of earth for a much longer period than usual. When I last saw my dear ones, they had seemed in such vigorous health and were so surrounded by earthly blessings that I had ceased to feel they needed my ministrations as in the early days of their sorrow. So I had thrown all of my energies into the work assigned me by the Master. After resting a while, my brother arose to a sitting position and, regarding me for a moment in silence, said gently,
"I have some news for you, little sister."
A thrill like an electric shock passed through me, and in an instant I cried out, "He is coming!" He nodded his head with a sympathetic smile, but did not reply at once. "When will it be? Am I to go to him?" I asked. He hesitated an instant before saying,
"Of course you're permitted to go, if your heart will not be denied."
"Oh, I must go to him. I must be the first to greet him. Perhaps it may be granted that he can see me even while he is yet in the flesh." He shook his head sadly at this and said,
"No, dear, he will not know you."
"Why? Frank, tell me everything. And why do you think, as I plainly see you do, that it is not best I should go to him?"
He had a stroke suddenly while he was at work. He was apparently in perfect health, but has not regained consciousness since, nor will he ever on earth. So your presence would be of no solace to him.
"When was this?"
3 days ago. I have been with him almost constantly day and night ever since.
"Why didn't you tell me sooner?"
We thought it wise to spare you the unnecessary pain of seeing him suffer when you could not minister to him. And I have come to tell you now that you may go, if you still want.
"He will know me as soon as the struggle is past."
Yes, but he will be bewildered and weak. He will need stronger help and guidance than you alone can give. And you will miss the rapture of the meeting as it would be a little later on.
"What do you think I should do? You know I will yield to your wiser judgment, even though I want so to go in my heart. But I'm not sure I can wait."
I won't say don't go. You can come with me if you wish. I only think that after the first bewilderment of the change is past, after he is bathed in the waters of the river of life, he will be better prepared for the delightful reunion which is waiting for him. You remember what the waters did for you, and how bewildered and oppressed in spirit you were until you went with me that morning into the river. It is the same with all of us, only when there has been serious trouble with the brain at the end, it is even more needed than on ordinary occasions. And that's the case with my brother. He will not be fully himself until the magical waters have swept the clouds from his brain.
"You are right, Frank. I will take your wise advice, although my heart cries out to be at his side. When will you return to him?"
Immediately. There will be little time to wait. With the quickening of the morning light, we will be here. My brave-hearted, wise little sister. The delay will not be sorrowful or long.
He stood, and bending over me, dropped a kiss lightly on my head. In a moment he disappeared from sight. I thought, how strange that even in this matter so near to my heart, I am able to yield completely. Father, I thank thee. I thank thee for the glad reunion so near at hand, but even more than that, for the sweet submission in all things that has grown into my life, that I can yield to thy will even when you would permit it to be otherwise. I bowed my head on my hand and let my mind wander to both sad and happy thoughts. Was my beloved husband indeed insensible to his suffering? Would the Father mercifully spare him even the pang of the parting? Oh, that the morning was here! How could I wait even that brief while for the sight of his beloved face? Suddenly, a soft touch rested on my bowed head, and a voice I had learned to recognize and love beyond all things in earth or heaven said,
"Have I not said truly, though he were dead, yet he shall live again? What are now the years of separation, since the meeting again is at hand? Come, let us reason a little together."
the Master said, smiling down into my uplifted face. He took my extended hand into his own, and sitting down beside me, continued,
"Let us consider what these years have done for you. Do you not feel that you are infinitely better prepared to confer happiness than when you parted from him who you love?"
I nodded in glad affirmation.
Do you not realize that you stand on a higher plane, with more exalted ideas of life and its duties, and that, in the strength of the Father, you too henceforward will walk upward together?
Again I gladly acquiesced.
Is the home life here less attractive than it was in the earth life?
No, 1,000 times no, I cried.
Then there's nothing but joy in the reunion at hand?
nothing but joy. Then the Savior talked with me of the one so soon to come, and I opened my heart to him and told him of the noble life, the unselfish toil, the high aspirations, the unfaltering trust of him that I loved. I spoke of his fortitude in misfortune, his courage in the face of sore trial and disappointment, his forgiveness of even malicious injury, and concluded by saying, he lived the Christianity many others professed. He always outdistanced me in that. The face of the Master glowed in sympathy as I talked, and when I stopped, he said,
I perceive that you have discovered the secret that makes marriage eternal as the years of heaven.
Oh, I said, to me marriage must be eternal. How could it be otherwise when two grow together and become as one? Death cannot separate them without destroying. They are no longer two perfect beings, but one in soul and spirit forever.
But having the marriage rite pronounced does not produce this change. It is the divinity of soul wedded to soul alone that can do it.
And so we talked until my soul flew upward as a lark in the early morning. He unfolded to me mysteries of the soul life that filled my heart with rapture. To my infinite surprise, I saw the rosy glow deepening across the sky and knew that morning, love's morning, had dawned for me in heaven. The Master arose and, pointing to the radiance, said,
By the time thou art ready to receive them, they will be here.
And with a smile and a touch that made a benediction, he departed. As I arose and stood with face uplifted to the coming day, I caught in the near distance the triumphant notes of the angels' choral song, and this morning, as though in sympathy with my thoughts, they sang, He is risen. Hear it, ye heavens, and ye sons of earth. He is risen, and has become the first fruits of them that slept. I lifted up my voice with joy and joined the thrilling song. As they swept onward and the cadence died away, I slowly walked down the stairway, crossed the lawn, whose flowers never crushed or withered beneath our feet, and sank for a moment beneath the pure waters of the river. I felt in no hurry. No unwanted excitement or unrest, though I knew that he was coming, the one my soul had waited for all these years. The Master's presence had filled me with calm and peace that nothing had power to disturb, had prepared and fitted me for the great happiness lying just before me. Uplifted with a new strange delight, I recrossed the lawn, stopping on the veranda before entering the house to gather a knot of cream-white roses and fasten them to my robe. Then, going to the library, I refilled the golden bowl with the spicy scarlet carnations, laying one aside to fasten on my husband's robe. I wanted to gather the flowers that would greet him myself. I twisted my hair up in the manner he had most admired, and fastened a creamy bud within the folds, that I might look as I once did for him. Soon thereafter, I heard voices and steps. Listen! Yes, it is the same dear step that I had so often listened for in the old home life, the step that had always brought gladness to my heart and sunshine into our home. His step in heaven. I flew to the open doorway and in an instant was held close in the strong arms and to the loving, throbbing heart of my dear husband. Was there anything more for me that heaven could give? My brother, thoughtfully, went upstairs, and for a while we were alone together. We whose lives had run so happily mingled through the long years of our mortal life. I brought him inside the house, and in the vestibule again he took me in his arms. This is heaven indeed, he said. We passed into the flower room, and on its threshold he stood a moment, entranced with its beauty. But when I started to tell him the room's history as Frank had related to me, he said, Not today, my dear. I only have eyes and ears for you today. All else in heaven must wait. So we sat and talked together as in the olden days, and the happy hours came and went. The day melted into the twilight glow before we realized it was half spent. Our brother Frank had come to us about noontide, and together we had gone through the lovely house and had stood on the broad veranda and eaten some of the heavenly fruit. Then we all sat together where I had spent the hours waiting in the presence of the Blessed Master. I told him much of what he had said to me, and how he turned the hours I had anticipated spending in lonely waiting into triumphant rejoicing. The eyes of my dear husband were tear-filled, and he pressed my hand, which he still kept in his. "Oh, darling, it is a blessed, blessed life," I said. "I already realize the blessedness," he replied, "for it has given me back my brother and my precious wife." Early the following morning I said to my husband and our brother, "We must go to Father and Mother Sprague's today. They have the first claim after ours, Frank."
"Yes, we will go at once."
So together we all started out. In the beginning days of my heavenly life, I had spent many hours of joy at the home of my husband's parents, and they always welcomed me warmly. Now we were bringing to them a favorite son, and I realized how his coming would bring gladness to their hearts and home. It was a joyful meeting, especially to our mother, and we spent most of the day with them. "William," said our mother fondly, laying her hand on his arm, "yours was a happy home on earth. I used to think a perfect home. It will be far happier here." He replied, "I am sure of that, Mother. I have my wife and Frank constantly with me, and you and Father. I look forward to the holier joys and privileges of heaven." We turned to go, and as we were leaving, met an aunt who in the earth life, blind and helpless, was a favorite with us all. "My dear children, how good to see you all again," she said. "Aunt Cynthia," my husband said fondly. "Yes, Aunt Cynthia, but no longer groping helpless in the darkness. Whereas I once was blind, now I see," she quoted happily, smiling. And so it was. The Master's touch had rested on the sightless eyes, and closing to the darkness of earth, they had opened upon the glories of heaven. Marvelous transition! No wonder we left her singing, "Glory to him who this marvel hath wrought." Filling my spirit with joy and delight, lo, in my blindness I safely have walked out of the darkness into the light. Chapter 17. Days lengthened into weeks, and weeks into months, and these in turn crept onward into years, and the duties and joys of heaven grew clearer and dearer with each passing hour. Our home life was perfect, though we looked forward with joy to the future coming of our son and daughter to make its ties complete. We had often spoken of going together to the great celestial sea, but the time had never seemed quite right for doing so. We realized it was one of the great mysteries of heaven, although we didn't know just what to expect. One evening I said to my brother, "I have a strange desire to go to the sea, if you think it is wise that we do so."
"I'm glad you'd like to go. I was about to propose that you two should take this journey together."
"But won't you come with us?"
"Not this time. We'll all take it again together, but it's best that now you two should go alone. You know the way, through the forest that leads to the temple. Until almost there, then bear to the right, and follow the golden path that takes you directly to the shore.
So in the quivering light of the glorious morning we started, full of holy joy that we could take this special journey together. We entered and traversed the great forest, where the golden light fell through the quivering branches overhead, and the birds of gorgeous plumage and thrilling song were darting everywhere. We heard nearer, and ever nearer, the regular dashing of the waves against the shore, and now there came to us burst of triumphant song and the harmony of many instruments of music. We emerged from the forest and stood mute and motionless before the overwhelming glory of the scene before us. Can I describe it as it appeared to me that day? Never, until my lips can speak and your heart can understand the language of the royal courts above. From our very feet sloped downward toward the shore a golden strand many 100 feet wide, and extending as far as we could see in either direction. This strand caught and radiated the morning light until wherever it was visible it glittered and glimmered like the dust of diamonds and other precious stones. The waves, as they came and went in ceaseless motion, caught the sparkling sand and carried it on their crests like the phosphorescence we sometimes see in the wake of a vessel in mid-ocean. And the sea! It spread out before us in a radiance that passes description in any language I have ever known. It was like the white glory that shone through the windows of the temple, and beneath this shining glory we caught, in the roll of the waves, the blue tint of the waters that sea which has no limit to its depths or bounds. Upon the sea we saw in every direction boats representing all nations, but the beauty of their construction far surpassing anything earth has ever known. They were like great open pleasure barges, and were filled with people looking with eager faces toward the shore, many in their eagerness standing erect and gazing with wistful, expectant eyes into the faces of those upon the shore. Ah, the people on the shore! Numberless as the sands of the sea, they stood as far as the eye could see, a great mass of beautiful souls clad in the spotless garments of the redeemed. Many among them had golden harps and various instruments. Whenever a boat touched the shore, its inmates were welcomed by the glad voices and tender embraces of their loved ones. Then the harps would be held high, all of the golden instruments would sound, and the vast multitude would break forth into the triumphant song of victory over death and the grave. Do these people stand here all the time, I wonder? I said softly. Not the same people, said a radiant being near us who had heard my question. But there is always a throng of people here, those who are expecting friends from the other life and those who assemble to share their joy. Some of the heavenly choristers also are always here, but not always the same ones. You will notice that most of those who arrive are led quietly away by their friends, and many others are constantly joining the multitude. He passed on toward the shore and left us wrapped in awe and wonder. We soon became deeply interested in watching the reunions, and found ourselves joining with the glad songs of rejoicing. Now and then a face we remembered seeing on earth would be among the eager faces in the boats, but none that had been especially dear to us. Still, it made us notice more closely and sympathize more heartily with those who welcomed beloved friends. Now we would see a wife caught in the close embrace of a waiting husband. Now a little child with a glad cry would spring into the outstretched arms of the happy mother. Friend would clasp friend in glad reunion, and here an aged mother would be folded to the heart of a beloved child. As one boat of more than usual strength and beauty came riding gracefully over the waves, we observed the tall figure of a man standing near her prow, with his arms around a graceful woman who stood by his side. Each shaded their eyes from all the splendor with uplifted hand and scanned wistfully the faces of the crowd as the boat neared the shore. Suddenly, with a great thrill of joy surging through me, I cried out, "It's our precious son and his dear wife, and they have come together." In an instant we were moving through the throng that parted in sympathy to let us pass, and as the boat touched the shore, they were both beside us. The dear daughter, already close, hugged her own happy parents who were waiting near the water's edge, while at the same time we felt the arms of our beloved son enfolding us. Oh, what a glorious moment that was! Our home life in heaven was now complete. No partings forever. As we stood with encircling arms, the heavenly choir broke into song, and with uplifted faces, radiant with joy, our eyes filled with happy tears, and voices trembling with emotion, we all joined in the glad anthem. Glory be unto the Father, and unto the Son. Glory be unto the ever-blessed Three-in-One. No more sorrow, no more parting, no more grief or pain. Christ has broken death's strong fetters. We are free again. Heart to heart and hand to hand, meet we on the golden strand. Glory, glory to the Father, glory to the Son, glory be unto the ever-blessed Three-in-One. Alleluia, Amen. The song rose and swelled triumphantly as the vast multitude sang, and the surge of the waves made a deep undertone to the melody that increased its solemnity, and the light that fell around us was pure, holier, more divine than it had ever been before. Chapter 18. The time came when one day, as I stood in my lovely room, that had really become to me a shrine, and looked up into the pictured face of the Christ above me, I fancied that the tender eyes looking down into mine no longer told of a deathless love alone, but carried in their depths a pity, a loving compassion, which I had never noticed there before. Then as I turned toward my couch, I even fancied that his hands reached out from the canvas and rested a benediction on my head. I stood a moment in peace before him. Then as the hands seemed to be withdrawn, I turned and lay down for an instant's rest. But strange thoughts and fancies crept into my brain, such as I had not known in years. I felt confused and bewildered and sat up restlessly, only to fall back again in doubt and something akin to dread. What could this mean? Could the old unrest of earth find place in this divine retreat? Then I heard unfamiliar voices. Someone said, "Her color is better than it has been for several days, I think. Yes, there is no doubt that she is better today. There really is hope for her now, I am sure. But she came very near passing through the gates." Very near passing through the gates? As though I had not passed through, and in returning left them so ajar that gleams of the heavenly radiance from beyond will fall about my life forever. I have been in my Father's house. We shall know each other there.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
This is Audible.
You are listening to Puritan Audio's production,
of The Art of Divine Contentment by Thomas Watson. This book is read by David Cochran Heath. This audio recording is distributed by Christian Audio, an imprint of eChristian, and was produced in 2011 by Puritan Audio, an imprint of Reformation Heritage Books, which owns the copyright. No portion of this recording may be reproduced for any reason without prior written consent from Reformation Heritage Books. Originally reprinted by Soli Deo Gloria in English as The Art of Divine Contentment. Copyright 2001 by Soli Deo Gloria. All rights reserved.
Epistle to the Reader. Christian reader, having seriously considered the great dishonor done to Almighty God, as well as the prejudice which accrues to ourselves by the sin of discontent, a universal and epidemic sin, it put me upon the study of this subject at first. Nor is it incongruous to handle this next in order to the Christian Charter, reprinted by Soli Deo Gloria in the Sermons of Thomas Watson. I showed you there the great things which a believer has in reversion. Things to come are his, and here behold a Christian's holy and gracious deportment in this life, which reveals itself in nothing more eminently than in being content. Discontent is to the soul as a disease is to the body. It puts it out of temper and much hinders its regular and sublime motions heavenward. Discontent is hereditary and no doubt is much augmented by the many sad eclipses and changes that have fallen out of late in the political body. Yet the disease is not to be excused because it is natural, but resisted because it is sinful. That which should put us out of love with this sullen distemper is the contemplation of the beautiful Queen of Contentment. For my part,